My name is Adrian, I am 8 years old, and I already understand one thing that most adults in this village will never figure out. Working harder does not make you richer here. It just makes you more tired. My father Klaus wakes up before sunrise every single morning. He laces the same cracked boots, walks 2 miles to the farm, and works until his back gives out. He comes home smelling like mud and animals and says nothing at dinner. My mother spends her days bent over a wooden tub, scrubbing other people's shirts until her knuckles crack and bleed. She gets paid in small coins that disappear before the week is out. We eat once a day, sometimes twice. In winter, sometimes every other day. There is always a moment at the table when I watch my parents count what is left in the pot before they serve themselves, making sure I get enough first. They think I don't notice. I notice everything. I watch this and I think, what is the point? They work every hour. They are awake and nothing changes. Same dirt floor, same cracked walls, same single candle that we blow out early because wax costs money. I am 8 years old and I can already see exactly what my life looks like at 40 if I follow the same road. I decide at 8 that I will not follow that road. The problem is I have no idea what the other road looks like. I just know it involves knowing things that my father doesn't know. I don't buy books. We don't have money for books. But I noticed something early on. People throw books away. Not valuable ones, torn ones, old ones, books that lost their covers or got water damaged, or belonged to someone who died and whose family couldn't read anyway. I start going door to door in the village. I knock and I ask politely if they have any old papers or books they don't want. Most people say no and close the door. Some give me things. The first one is half a Latin grammar textbook with no cover, and the first 30 pages missing. The binding is falling apart, and someone used the margins to draw pictures of horses. I take it home and I sit with it for 3 months. I sound out every word I don't know. I copy letters onto scraps of rough paper until the shapes stick. By the time I finish it, I'm reading faster than I was stumbling through it at the start. I find out about the village teacher by accident. His name is Brother Anselm. He runs the school for the 4 boys in the village whose families can afford the small weekly fee. I hear him reading aloud from a text one afternoon when I'm passing his cottage window. He reads slowly, tracing his finger under each line, lips moving. I have read that same book. I read it faster than he is reading it now. I keep walking. Over the next 2 years I collect one arithmetic primer with half the pages stuck together from a water leak, a crumbling treatise on the movements of stars written in formal Latin, and the back half of a book about the nature of substances, compounds, metals, the properties of minerals. The front half is gone. Someone used it for fire starter. I try to reconstruct what the missing chapters said from context. I get most of it right, I think. I have no way to check. I read everything slowly, then fast, then again. I copy out the parts I want to remember. I don't have good paper, so I use smooth bark in summer, and the backs of packaging from the market when I can get it. There's one problem with all of this. I can only read during the day. In summer, daylight lasts long, and I can read until the sky goes dark. In winter, darkness falls by late afternoon, and then I have nothing. Candles cost money. We do not have money for candles. My father burns exactly what is necessary to see through dinner, and then the candle goes out. I try reading by the firelight from the hearth. The pages turn orange and yellow, and my eyes hurt after 20 minutes. My father tells me I'm wasting the wood's heat by sitting so close. He tells me to go to sleep. I lie in the dark and think about problems instead. But it is not the same as reading. I cannot check what I am thinking against what is written. I cannot find the next page of a half-finished argument. I am stuck waiting for sunrise every single night, losing 6, 7, 8 hours of the only time I have. This bothers me in a way that I cannot explain and cannot shake. The darkness is not just inconvenient. It is a wall. Every night it takes half my time and gives me nothing back. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a question starts forming, though I don't have the words for it yet. Why does the night have to be dark? I start working at 10. The postmaster at the village inn lets me clean and polish boots left outside room doors in the morning. 3 pairs, sometimes 4. I earn a few small coins per week. I save them in a crack in the wall behind my sleeping mat. When I have enough, I buy paper. Real paper from the market. Thin and rough but flat and white, and it takes ink proper. 6 months later, the notary in the village, a stout man named Gerber who writes contracts for farmers and occasionally reads official letters out loud at the market square, notices me delivering a message for the inn. He asks if I can read. I say yes. He asks me to read the message I'm carrying. I read it. I correct his name, which the sender spelled wrong. Gerber stares at me for a moment. He offers me work, carrying letters and documents between the village and the farm estates nearby. He pays a bit more than the boots. I take it. I now have 2 sources of income, both small. Between them I can afford paper, occasionally ink, and once, a single new book from the traveling market that comes through twice a year. It is a compendium of practical geometry, measuring land, calculating load-bearing weight in construction, the basic rules of levers and pulleys. I read it in 4 days. I read it again in 2. I'm 11 when the teacher, Brother Anselm, sees me with a book on geometry. I'm sitting on a fence outside the village, working through a problem in the chapter on triangles. He is walking past with 2 of his students. He stops. "What are you reading?" he asks. His tone is the kind adults use when they expect a child to say something entertaining by accident. "A geometry compendium," I say, "the section on triangle ratio." And what do you understand from it? I tell him what I understand. I explain the theorem on the page, the relationship between the sides and angles of a right triangle, correctly, in full, without looking down. Then I add, there is a mistake in the 4th chapter. The formula for calculating the slope of an irregular surface is missing a step. If you apply it as written, you get the wrong angle. Anselm's expression does not change. He reaches out and takes the book from my hands. He opens it to the 4th chapter. He reads. He reads for a long time. He hands the book back to me without a word. He walks away with his 2 students. He never speaks to me again after that. Not once. I pass him on the road several times in the following months. He looks past me the way you look past a fence post. I don't mind. The problem with my father starts the year I turn 12. Until then he knows I work, and he knows I spend what I earn on books and paper, but he doesn't push hard because the amounts are small and I'm quiet and don't cause trouble. Then something shifts. Maybe he calculates what I've earned over 2 years and adds up what I've kept for myself. Maybe he is just having a worse year than usual. He comes to me one evening and tells me that everything I earn goes to the household from now on. All of it. The boots, the letters, whatever else I find. He needs it. I look at him. All of it. All of it. There won't be money for paper or books. You don't need paper and books. You need to learn to work. I don't answer. I think about what this means. No paper means no notes. No notes means everything I learn stays only in my head, which means I lose half of it because I can't check back. No new books means the wall I'm working through stops moving. It's not that I can't survive without those things. It's that without them I stop going somewhere. I become my father. I tell him I need to think about it. He takes that as agreement and leaves it as not agreement. I start hiding money, a small portion, not enough to notice, not enough to fight about. I keep giving him the main part of what I earn. I save the edge. I buy paper in very small amounts from different sellers at the market so no single purchase stands out. My father notices anyway. I don't know how. Maybe the paper, maybe something else. One evening he finds 2 folded sheets under my sleeping mat. He hits me without much warning. I fall sideways against the wall. My ear rings. I stay on the ground for a moment, and then I stand up and I look at him. I don't cry. I don't say anything. He is waiting for me to flinch or apologize. I don't do either. I just look at him with an expression I can't control. Not defiant, not angry, just calm, like I'm observing something I already expected. He looks away first. That makes him angrier. He hits me again. Then he leaves the room. I pick up the paper from where it fell. Both sheets are still usable. This happens 4 more times over the next year, always the same shape. He finds something I've kept, or he is short on money and needs more than I gave, and it ends with a hitting and him walking away angrier than before because I won't break the way he needs me to break. I think about this while I'm delivering letters in the morning. I don't hate him. I'm not sure that's the right word for what I feel. I think he is trapped, and I think he knows he is trapped, and I think watching me refuse to be trapped the same way is the worst thing he has to look at every day. It's not something I can fix. It's not something either of us can fix. We are just 2 people standing on opposite sides of a wall that has no door. I focus on what I can control. I keep working. I keep reading. I keep the hiding places small and spread across 3 different spots, so that if he finds one, there are still 2 others. I'm 12 years old and I am running a small logistics operation to protect my paper supply from my father. I'm 13 when my mother has the second baby. It happens quickly, the way these things do. 1 week she is large and slow, and the next there is a crying infant in the house and everything is louder and smaller at the same time. The baby is healthy. My mother is exhausted. My father sits across from me at dinner 3 days after the birth. He looks at the infant. He looks at me. He does the calculation out loud. 2 children is too many mouths, he says. You're old enough to be out of this house. Either you leave and find your own way, or you stay and give everything you earn, every coin, to this family. No books, no paper, no nonsense. You work to live, same as everyone else. I eat the rest of my food. I need to think, I say. You have tonight, he says. That night, I lie awake for a long time. I think about staying, about what that looks like. Every coin to my father, every day, forever, until I am 30, and the same, and nothing has changed except the size of the hole. I think about what I would have to give up to do it. Not just the paper and the books, the thinking. The problem I am slowly, imprecisely working toward, the darkness question. The why does. The night have to be dark question that I don't have a name for yet, but that sits at the back of my mind like a nail sticking up from a floor. If I stay here, I bury that question. I think about leaving. I have no money, or nearly none. I don't know anyone in the city. I have never been more than 15 miles from this village in my life. I have 7 books and a sack I can carry them in, and whatever small coins are in my hiding places. That is the entire inventory. I count what I know instead. I know arithmetic and geometry. I know basic Latin. I know the theory of substances and compounds from my half-book. I know how to read contracts from watching Gerber. I know how to calculate. I know how to work without being told what to do. Those things go wherever I go. I fall asleep before I make the decision. When I wake up, the decision is already made. It is quiet in the way that only finished things are quiet. I wait for my father to leave for the farm. I wait for my mother to fall back asleep after the early feeding. I pull the sack out from under my mat. I put the books in. I take the coins from all 3 hiding spots, 12 copper in total, and put them in my pocket. I look at the room one more time. Dirt floor, cracked wall, one small window facing east. The sun is just starting to come through it. I walk out. The carriage is parked outside the inn before sunrise. I see it from the road. A merchant's coach, heavy built, with iron-banded wheels, and a luggage compartment built into the undercarriage below the passenger bench. The driver is inside the inn eating breakfast. I can hear him through the open window. He ordered eggs. He is going to be a few minutes. I look at the compartment. The latch is a simple iron hook, not a lock. I can see a stack of fabric rolls through the gap, bolts of cloth, probably packed tight. And between the cloth and the frame, there is a space. Not comfortable, but a space. I look up the road that goes back toward the village. Then I look at the road going the other direction, toward the city. I open the latch and climb in. 3 hours in the dark. The cloth smells like lanolin and old dye. Every time the carriage hits a rut, I slide into the wooden frame. My left shoulder takes most of it. The air in the compartment is warm and close and tastes like dust. I use the time to think. I have 12 copper coins. I have 7 books. I have no contacts in the city, no place to sleep, no letter of introduction, and no trade skill that anyone will pay for on site. I know what I know: arithmetic, geometry, Latin, the basic theory of compounds, but none of that is visible from the outside. A 14-year-old boy with a canvas sack and dirty boots is just a 14-year-old boy with a canvas sack and dirty boots. So the first problem is, get into the city without being immediately thrown out of it. I work through the options. The driver is going to open this compartment eventually. When he does, he will see me. He will either be angry or frightened, or both. If I run, he might not bother chasing, but running means I arrive with nothing. No introduction, no contact, no reason for anyone to talk to me. If I don't run, I need to give him a reason to bring me to his employer instead of leaving me on the road. I look at the document rolls stuffed behind the cloth bales. I can see the edge of a ledger spine. Trading records, probably. Merchants always travel with their books. I have a reason. The carriage stops. I hear the driver climb down from the box. His boots hit the cobblestones, so we are inside the city already. The latch clicks, and the compartment door swings open and light hits me all at once. The driver stares at me. He is a wide man, mid-40s, with a red face and a short beard. He stares for a long moment with his mouth slightly open. Boy, he starts. I can fix your employer's ledger books, I say. I keep my voice even. I saw the trading records behind the cloth. I can review them and find any errors in the accounting. Tell him that before you throw me out. He closes his mouth, he opens it again. How old are you? 14. That doesn't affect arithmetic. He stares at me for another few seconds. Then he steps back and rubs his face with one hand. He is thinking about whether this is his problem. He decides it is his employer's problem. Get out, he says, and follow me. Don't touch anything. The merchant's name is Ott. He operates from a ground floor office off the main trading street, a room stacked with crates and sample boards, 2 clerks scratching away at desks, and a smell of sawdust and dried herbs. He is a lean man, 50s, with quick eyes and a measuring expression. He looks at me the way he probably looks at goods that might be damaged, checking whether it's worth the time. The driver explains in 4 sentences. Ott listens, then looks at me. You hid in my carriage. Yes. From where? Village called Breck, 3 hours west. Running from something? Running towards something. There's a difference. He considers this for a moment. Then, my ledgers don't need fixing. My clerks are competent. Then it costs you nothing to let me look for 5 minutes. He almost smiles. Not quite. He pulls a ledger from the nearest desk, the weekly account book, current month, and drops it on the corner of the desk in front of me. 5 minutes, he says. I'll be watching. I sit down and open the book. The entries are laid out in columns. Date, item, quantity, price paid, price received, margin. The handwriting is neat. The arithmetic is mostly right. I go through the columns quickly, running the sums in my head, cross-checking the totals at the bottom of each page against the individual entries. Page 1, correct. Page 2, correct. Page 3, there. A quantity error on a cloth shipment. The clerk wrote 48 bolts received, but the individual line entries add to 46. The price calculation used 48. 2 bolts of cloth, somewhere. Either arrived and weren't recorded separately, or were recorded and the total is wrong. I flip back 2 pages. There's a return entry. 2 bolts sent back to the supplier for quality defect. The return is logged but was never subtracted from the received total. The margin calculation on that shipment is inflated by the cost of 2 bolts. I keep going. By 4 minutes I have 3 discrepancies flagged. The cloth shipment, a double entry on a spice payment that reduced the recorded income by 11 copper, and a miscalculated exchange rate on a foreign currency transaction that cost Ade approximately 1 silver coin. I put my finger on each one and look up. Your clerk isn't cheating you, I say. These are genuine errors. The cloth return wasn't properly reconciled. A spice payment was entered twice, and whoever calculated the Flemish exchange rate used last month's rate instead of this month's. I pushed the book across the desk. 12 copper in recoverable errors, roughly, plus the cloth question which needs to be checked against the supplier's receipt. Ott steps forward and looks at the pages where my finger was. He does not say anything for a moment. Then he reaches into his coat, takes out a single copper coin, and sets it on the desk. That's for your time. Now get out of my office. I look at the coin. I look at him. I was hoping for work. I have clerks. Your clerks made 3 errors in 1 month. My clerks have references and a roof over their heads. You have a sack. He nods at the door. Coin's yours. Go. I pick up the coin. 11 copper plus 1, 12 total, not 0, and I am in the city. I stand on the main square and I look at the city for 10 minutes straight. It is bigger than anything I calculated from descriptions. The square alone is wider than my entire village. There are 5 streets feeding into it from different angles, all of them moving carts, people, animals, noise layered on top of noise. The market takes up the east side of the square. Spices, cloth, vegetables, a smith's stall with small tools hanging on a wooden board. A church occupies the north end, stone-built with a bell tower. Around the square, the buildings are 2 and 3 stories, most of them with shops on the ground floor and living quarters above. There is more concentrated activity here than in my entire village's entire year of activity. I stop cataloging and start thinking practically. I need 3 things in order: a place to sleep, food, and a reliable source of income. In that order, because without sleep I can't think, and without thinking I can't solve the other 2. I spend the rest of the morning walking the city's outer ring, the part where the buildings get cheaper and the streets get narrower. I'm looking for work signs, open doors, any place that might need hands. By midday, I have tried 4 places. A tanner's shop needs apprentices, but only with a master's letter of recommendation. A bakery, full. A cartwright's yard. The foreman looks at my hands, no calluses, and shakes his head before I finish my sentence. A warehouse. The overseer says come back in 2 years when you're bigger. I sit on a stone wall near the eastern gate and eat half of the bread I bought with 2 copper in the morning. I think about what I'm not doing right. The problem is not my ability. The problem is that nobody can see my ability. Every refusal is a version of the same thing. You have no proof of what you claim, and proof here means a letter from someone they already trust. I don't have a letter, so I need to find a place that doesn't require one. The mill is at the edge of the city, where the main road bends east toward the river. I smell it before I see it. The clean, dusty smell of grain being crushed, and underneath it the grease of wooden gears. The mill wheel turns in a steady channel cut from the river, and from 30 paces away, I can hear the thump and groan of the millstone. The miller's name is Hugo. I know this because it is written on a wooden board over the door, Hugo's Mill. Grain, flour, grinding. Below the name, in smaller letters, someone has added, workers wanted. No experience needed, meals and lodging. No experience needed. No letter required. Meals and a place to sleep included. I go in. Hugo is a thick man, not tall, but wide through the chest, with flour on his hands and a permanent squint from years of working in dusty air. He looks me over in about 3 seconds and asks 2 questions. Can you lift a full grain sack? I look at the sacks stacked by the wall. They are heavy. If I have to, I say. Can you show up every morning without being told? Yes. He looks at me for 1 more second. You eat with the workers. You sleep in the storeroom loft with the other 2. You work from first light to midday, then 2 hours in the afternoon. Sundays you clean. You get paid 4 copper on Friday plus meals. I think about this 4 copper a week plus food and a roof. It is less than I made in the village. But in the village I had no rent to pay because I lived at home. Here, 4 copper plus no rent is better than nothing in a city I don't know. I'll take it, I say. Hugo nods and goes back to his work. The negotiation is over. He doesn't ask my name for another 3 days. The storeroom loft is a wooden platform above the grain sacks, reached by a ladder nailed to the wall. There are 2 other workers already sleeping there, a man named Paul who is about 30 and does not talk much, and a boy of 16 called Ernst who talks constantly and says very little. There is 1 small window that faces west. At night, when the city's street lamps reflect off the low clouds, a dim orange glow comes through it, not enough to read by. But I am in the city. I have a roof and food and 4 copper per week, and I haven't been here a full day yet. I put my sack of books in the corner where the roof is lowest and the draft doesn't reach. I lie down on the straw mat. The millstone is still grinding below me, a low constant vibration in the floor. I lie there and feel it and think about how a millstone works. The water pushes the wheel turns a shaft. The shaft connects through gears to the stone, a chain of movement. Energy from the water transferred through wood and iron, arriving as rotation at the grinding surface. I fall asleep thinking about chains of movement. The first week at the mill, I understand 2 things. The work is hard in a simple, physical way that has no complexity to it. And Hugo is exactly the kind of man who will keep me here as long as I am useful and let me go the moment I am not. That is fine. I don't need him to like me. I need the roof and the food and the 4 copper on Friday. My job in the mornings is moving sacks. Grain comes in from the farms by cart, 50-pound sacks, sometimes heavier, stacked in the yard and needing to be carried inside to the storage bins. I'm not big. The first sack I try to lift properly, I drop after 4 steps. Hugo watches from the doorway and says nothing. I figure out that if I tilt the sack against my hip and walk sideways instead of carrying it straight, I can manage the distance. By the end of the week, my shoulders have stopped complaining. In the afternoons, I clean. Millstone grinding produces flour dust that gets into everything. The gears, the shaft housing, the wooden channels that direct the grain flow. Left alone, it hardens and creates friction. Hugo has a boy's job and a man's job, and the boy's job is cleaning. I do it without being told twice, which seems to be the main quality Hugo values in a worker. Pole, the quiet 30-year-old in the loft, turns out to be the mill's main mechanic. He knows every gear and shaft in the building. He doesn't talk much, but he watches things carefully. And twice in my first month, I watch him stop what he is doing, tilt his head at a sound coming from the gearbox, and then take the mechanism apart and fix a problem before it becomes a break. He is good at what he does in the specific, narrow way that people who do one thing for 20 years get good at it. Ernst talks about everything and does his work badly. Hugo tolerates him because his uncle is one of Hugo's regular grain suppliers. This is the second thing I learn about how the world works here. Competence matters, but connection often matters more. I file that away and keep moving sacks. 3 weeks in, one of the gear links on the secondary shaft cracked. It is a small iron piece, not expensive, but it means the upper grinding stone can't be engaged, which means Hugo loses half his milling capacity until the smith makes a replacement. The smith is 2 days out. Hugo is angry in a restrained, money-counting way. I look at the cracked piece, I look at the gearbox. I ask Pole if there is a spare link from any older mechanism in the mill. Pole thinks, then leads me to a corner behind the grain bins where there is a pile of old parts from a previous mill rebuild. We find a link that is not the right size, but close. I spend an evening filing it down with a flat file until it fits. It holds. Hugo gets his upper stone back a day and a half early. He does not say thank you. He does not pay me extra. But the following Friday he bumps my wage by 1 copper per week without explanation. That is how Hugo says, thank you. I'm earning 5 copper a week now, meals and roof included. I start saving again. After 2 months I can carry a sack without thinking about it. The work is still simple, but my body has adjusted and my mind is free while my hands are busy, which means I spend most of the workday thinking. I think about the mill, not about working it, about how it works. The river pushes against the wheel paddles with a force that depends on how fast the water moves and how wide the paddles are. The wheel converts that push into rotation. The rotation moves a horizontal shaft. The shaft connects through a series of gears, each gear a different size, to the vertical shaft that drives the millstone. Every gear in the chain changes the relationship between speed and force. A smaller gear turns faster but with less push. A larger gear turns slower but with more. I start drawing diagrams in the margins of my paper, not because I need them to understand the mill, I understand it already, but because I'm trying to understand something beyond the mill. The chain is, water pushes, wheel turns, shaft rotates, gears step it down, stone grinds. At every step, the same energy is present. It changes form. Push becomes rotation, becomes slow, heavy rotation, but nothing is added and nothing disappears. The energy from the water is the same energy that arrives at the millstone. One evening, I'm sitting on the steps by the wheel housing watching the shaft turn. The wind has been strong today, and the auxiliary wind sail on the upper building, which Hugo uses on slow water days, has been rotating steadily all afternoon. I watch the shaft spin. It is spinning now. It will spin less when the wind drops tonight. When the wind is gone entirely, the shaft will stop. And all that rotation, all that energy the wind has been putting into the system, will simply stop existing. Where does it go? It goes nowhere. It is just gone. The shaft stops, the gears stop, the stone stops. Whatever the wind was giving the mill used it the moment it arrived and had no way to keep any of it. I sit there for a while with this thought. What if instead of using the rotation to grind grain, you used it to do something else? What if there were a way to take that turning shaft and use it to— I don't have words for what comes next. I have an image. A turning shaft doing something that results in something being stored, not movement, not heat. Something that can be released later, on demand like water behind a dam. I don't know what that something is yet, but the question is clear and it does not go away. In the city, there's a secondhand dealer on the street behind the cathedral who occasionally gets books in with his furniture and household lots. I have been checking his shelves on my free Sunday mornings for 2 months. Most of what he has is devotional texts and agricultural almanacs, but one Sunday in early autumn he has a new stack, and near the bottom I find a thin volume with a cracked leather spine, a treatise on natural properties, written in Latin, that includes a chapter on what the author calls the amber force, the phenomenon by which certain substances, when rubbed against fur or wool, develop the ability to attract small light objects. It costs 3 copper. I buy it without hesitating. I read it that night by the window, angled to catch the moonlight. The chapter is short, 12 pages, dense with Latin that slows me down but does not stop me. The writer describes experiments. Amber rubbed with cloth draws a feather. Glass rubbed with silk draws a strip of thin parchment. The force passes briefly along a metal wire and then is gone. The author has no explanation for why this happens. He reports the observations and stops there. I read the chapter 3 times. The force is real. The writer tested it and recorded the results. Amber rubbed against wool produces something, call it a property, a tension, a stored condition that can reach out and pull things. The force passes through metal. It disappears quickly. I lie back on the straw mat and look at the ceiling and think about lightning. Lightning is also a force that passes through air and hits the ground. Lightning is also brief, a fraction of a second, then gone. Lightning also follows metal. I have read that iron spires on churches are struck more often than stone walls. Lightning produces light and heat and a crack of sound that can be heard miles away. The amber force produces a small snap and a tiny spark when it discharges. They are the same thing. I am almost certain they are the same thing. The scale is completely different. The lightning in a summer storm is unimaginably larger than what a piece of amber can produce, but the shape of it is identical. Both are a sudden release of stored force along a path of least resistance. Both pass through metal. Both disappear in an instant. If I am right, then lightning is not a divine phenomenon. It is not the anger of the sky. It is a natural force. The same force that lives in a polished piece of amber, simply built to a scale that the amber cannot achieve on its own, which means it can be studied. And if it can be studied, it can eventually be understood. And if it can be understood, maybe it can be reproduced. I do not sleep for a long time that night. 3 weeks later, I'm working an evening shift at a tavern near the market square. I found the extra work through Pole, who knows the owner, clearing tables and washing cups. The pay is bad, but it fills the gap between the mill's hours and bedtime, and I need the money for materials. A man at a table near the window is holding court for 4 young students. He is maybe 50, well-dressed, with the particular posture of a person who is used to being listened to. He is a lecturer at the city's collegiate. I have seen him walking in and out of that building on my delivery routes. He is talking about lightning. I slow down, clearing the next table so I can hear him. He is explaining to the students that lightning is, in his words, a discharge of inflamed air caused by the collision of opposing sky currents. It is a meteorological event, he says, entirely unconnected to terrestrial substances or mechanical laws. There is no more mechanism in a lightning bolt than there is in a wave on the sea. I think about this for a moment. Then I say, if it has no direction and no mechanism, why does it always travel from above to below? A wave moves horizontally. Lightning moves vertically. What determines the direction? The lecturer turns and looks at me the way you look at a noise that turned out to be a person. Because the sky is above, he says. The students laugh. That describes the location. I say it doesn't explain the direction. If the force has no mechanism, there should be no preferred direction, but there is always a preferred direction. He holds my gaze for a moment. His expression does not change. He turns back to his students and continues his lecture as if I have not spoken. I go back to clearing tables. I'm not offended. I understand what happened. He did not answer the question. He redirected attention with a joke and moved on, which is what people do when they do not have an answer but cannot afford to appear uncertain. I have seen this before. With Brother Anselm in the geometry book, the question still stands. The force has a preferred direction. That means it has a structure. That means it is mechanical, whatever the lecturer thinks. I carry the empty cups back to the kitchen and think about what I need next. The amber force passes through metal and disappears. I need to understand why it disappears and whether there is a way to make it stay longer. I need materials to test with. I need time and a workspace that isn't a loft above grain sacks. I have money saved. Not much, but I am going to start spending it. I save for a month to buy the amber. The piece I find at the market is roughly the size of my thumb, pale yellow, cloudy in the center, with one smooth face where it was cut. The merchant wants 5 copper. I get him to 4.5. I carry it back to the mill loft and set it on the windowsill and look at it for a moment. 4.5 copper is almost a full week of savings. If this produces nothing, I will have wasted a month of patience on a piece of hardened tree resin. I take a strip of wool cut from an old sock, and I rub the amber back and forth. 20 strokes, 30. I hold a small feather I pulled from Hugo's yard over the surface. The feather lifts toward the amber. Not much, a few millimeters. But it lifts, clearly and repeatably, every time I bring the feather close after rubbing. The force is real. It is small and it disappears within a minute, but it is there and it is consistent. I hold the amber in the dark and bring my finger close to the edge. A tiny snap, a spark the size of a grain of sand, visible for a fraction of a second. I sit with this for a moment. The treatise calls it the amber force. I don't have a better name yet. I just call it the force. In my notes and in my head, it exists. It can be produced by friction. It can be stored briefly in the amber. It releases as a spark when it finds a path to something nearby. Those are the facts. Now I need to understand the edges of it. How much can be stored, how long it lasts, whether it can be moved, whether it can be increased. I start testing. The first question is simple. Does rubbing longer produce more force? I rub the amber for 10 strokes test, 20 strokes test, 50 strokes test. The feather lifts the same amount each time. There is a ceiling. Whatever the amber can hold, it fills up quickly and does not take more no matter how long I rub. It is like a cup. Once it is full, pouring more in does nothing. So the amber itself is the limit, not the rubbing. Second question, can I move the force somewhere else? I touch a thin copper wire to the charged amber and hold the other end near the feather. Nothing. I try again. Nothing. I try a third time, and this time I feel the faint snap on my fingers holding the wire, and nothing arrives at the far end. The force travels through the wire and disappears. Or rather, it does not travel. It simply discharges into me the moment the wire touches the amber, looking for the shortest path to something it can reach, which is my hand. The wire is not a channel, it is a drain. I write this down. Metal does not carry the force. Metal releases it. I sit with this for 2 days. It does not make sense to me yet. The treatise says the force passes along metal wires, but when I test it, it disappears. Maybe the treatise is wrong. Maybe I'm testing wrong. Maybe there is a difference between the force passing along a wire and the force discharging through a wire. I do not know enough to tell which. Third attempt. I get 2 more pieces of amber, smaller, cheaper fragments from a jeweler's discard pile, 1 copper for both. I charge all 3 pieces separately and hold them near each other to see if the forces combine. They do not combine. They cancel. When 2 charged pieces of amber come close to each other, the force in both of them releases between them. A small snap, both pieces neutral afterward. 3 charged pieces, same result. They drain each other before I can direct the force anywhere useful. 3 weeks of this. Every evening after the mill work and the tavern shift, an hour in the loft with the amber and the feather and my notes, nothing useful. The force is real, it can be created. And I cannot do anything meaningful with it yet because I cannot hold it, move it, or accumulate more of it than a single piece of amber allows. I'm frustrated in a specific technical way, not at the problem for being hard, but at myself for not yet seeing the shape of the solution. It is there. I know it is there. I'm looking at the wrong part of it. I go back to reading. The second-hand dealer on the Cathedral Street gets a new lot of books in early spring, part of an estate clearing from somewhere outside the city. I go through the stack carefully on a Sunday morning. Most of it is theology and household management. But near the bottom, there is a thin pamphlet, handwritten and then copied by a professional scribe, that appears to be notes from a natural philosopher on the subject of conducting and non-conducting substances. It costs 1 copper. The scribe's handwriting is cramped and inconsistent, but I can read it. The writer makes a distinction I have not seen clearly stated before. Some substances, he writes, allow the amber force to pass through them freely. Metals, wet materials, flesh. Other substances resist it almost entirely. Dry glass, dry wood, amber itself, sulfur, wax. The force does not travel through the second group. It stays where it is. I read that sentence 3 times. Glass does not conduct the force. Metal does. If I put metal inside glass, the metal holds the force and the glass prevents it from escaping through the outside. I put down the pamphlet. I have been trying to hold the force in the amber, which is the source, not a container. The amber both creates the force when rubbed and holds it temporarily before releasing it. But amber is a weak container. It bleeds force slowly into the air. What I need is a purpose-built container, something that holds force without releasing it, with a controlled way to put force in and a controlled way to take it out. Metal inside, glass outside, a wire going in, a wire coming out. Force enters through the inner wire, is held by the metal, cannot escape through the glass walls, and can be released only through the outer wire when I choose. I need a glass vessel. I go to the glass blower who works the market stalls on Thursday mornings. He is an old man who makes bottles and window panels and occasionally decorative pieces for wealthy households. I describe what I need, a glass cup, approximately the size of my fist, with walls as even as he can make them, no bubbles if possible. He asks what it is for. An experiment, I say. He charges me 3 copper and tells me to come back in 4 days. I spend those 4 days collecting the other materials. Thin metal foil. I find lead foil used to seal wine bottles in the trash behind a wine merchant's storage yard. I take enough to line the inside and outside of a cup, a short length of copper wire, bought from a metalsmith's offcut bin for half a copper, and a thin metal rod to serve as the contact point inside the vessel. 4 days later, I have the glass cup. I line the inside carefully with lead foil, pressing it flat against the glass. I wrap the outside in a second layer of foil. I run the copper wire from the inner foil up through the open top and bend it into a small loop, the charging contact. The outer foil I leave accessible as the discharge contact. I charge the amber, touch the wire loop to it, and rub again, and touch again, and rub again. I'm trying to push as much force as I can through the wire and into the inner foil. I do this for about 2 minutes. Then I stop. I hold a dry feather near the outer foil. Nothing. That is not useful. I try the finger test instead, the same way I felt the discharge from the wire before. I bring my finger close to the outer foil. The snap is not small this time. It hits my finger hard enough that my whole hand jerks back, and I knock my elbow against the wall and sit down on the floor involuntarily. My hand tingles from the finger to the wrist. I sit there for 10 seconds staring at my own fingers. The door to the storeroom opens and Hugo looks in from the hall. What was that noise? I fell, I say. Stop falling and come move the afternoon delivery. He closes the door. I look at the glass vessel sitting on the floor next to me. The force went in. The glass held it. It released all at once when my finger came close enough. The cup is full and I can empty it on demand. I pick it up carefully and set it on the windowsill. My hand is still tingling. I have a container. A real one, not amber, not a wire, but a purpose-built vessel for holding the force. The writer in the pamphlet had described the theory. I made the object, it works. But even now, sitting on the floor with a tingling hand and a working container, I can see the next problem clearly. The vessel holds 1 charge. 1 discharge and it is empty. It is like a bucket, useful, but still just a bucket. To do anything meaningful with the force I need a source that fills it continuously. Not a piece of amber that I rub by hand for 2 minutes, and then get 1 loud snap. Something that produces force in a steady stream. I need a source of continuous force. I go back to thinking about the mill. The shaft turns. The gears turn. The stone grinds. Everything moves continuously as long as the water or wind keeps pushing. The energy is continuous as long as the source is continuous. If I can find a way to turn continuous movement into continuous force, the same force that lives in the amber, but produced by rotation instead of rubbing, then I can fill the vessel faster than it empties. And if I can fill it faster than it empties, I can run something, light something, move something. I do not know how to build that yet, but I know exactly what direction to walk in. It is an autumn afternoon and the wind has been building since midday. By the time the last grain cart arrives at the mill, the gusts are strong enough that the auxiliary wind sail on the upper building is spinning faster than I have ever seen it. Hugo has engaged both grinding stones, which he rarely does simultaneously, because the power coming down the shaft is more than enough for one, and he does not like wasting it. The whole building is vibrating slightly at the joints. The shaft is a blur. I finish stacking the incoming sacks and I stand near the gearbox and watch the shaft turn. I have been thinking about the same problem for weeks. The glass vessel works. It holds the force, but it holds one charge, one rubbing session with the amber, one loud discharge empty. To do anything useful, I need to refill it faster than it empties, which means I need a source that produces force continuously, not in single small portions. Every time I think about this, I end up at the same wall. Friction produces the force, but friction by hand is slow and inconsistent. I rub the amber, get a charge, rub again, get another charge. Each rub is one small portion. I look at the shaft. It is spinning at a speed my hand could never match. It has been spinning for 6 hours today, and it will spin for another 3. It will spin tomorrow and the day after as long as the wind holds and the water flows. The mill does not get tired. The shaft does not need to rest. Rubbing produces the force. The shaft rubs constantly. If I put something on the shaft that rubs against something else, amber against wool, glass against fur, any friction pair that produces the force, it would rub continuously. Every rotation, more force. Continuous rotation, continuous force. Not a bucket being filled one cupful at a time, but a stream. I stand there for a while just following this thought to its end. The shaft turns a disc. The disc rubs against fixed pads. The pads collect the force. The force flows along wires to the glass vessels. The vessels fill. When they are full, I can draw from them, and while I am drawing from them, the disc is already refilling them. Continuous source, continuous storage, continuous output. I go back to work before Hugo notices I have been standing still. That evening, I spend 2 hours in the loft drawing the design. A disc, glass would work best based on what I know about conducting and non-conducting materials. Fixed wool or fur pads pressing against both flat faces of the disc as it rotates. A metal contact point at the rim to collect the force and route it to a wire. A simple wooden axle and frame to hold the whole assembly. The disc does not need to be large for a first test. I'm not trying to power anything yet. I'm trying to prove that the principle works, that rotation produces a continuous stream of force rather than a single charge. I need a glass disc. I need wool pads. I need a wooden frame small enough to fit on the workbench in the loft. And I need a way to make the axle spin smoothly without too much friction at the bearing points, because friction at the bearings would fight against the rotation I need. The wool I can get cheaply at the market. The wood I can cut from scrap in Hugo's yard. The bearing friction I can solve with rendered fat as a lubricant. The mill uses it on the gear housings, and there's always a small pot near the gearbox. The glass disc is the problem. It needs to be flat even, and large enough to produce a meaningful surface area of friction. The glass blower who made my vessel can do it. It will cost 6 copper at minimum, probably 8. I have 4 saved. I need 4 more copper, and I need them in the next few weeks before the autumn market season ends, and the glass blower closes his stall until spring. I work the tavern every available evening for 2 weeks. I take on an extra half day at the mill on Saturdays, which Hugo agrees to because the autumn grinding season is busy and he needs the hands. By the end of the second week, I have 7 copper saved. I go to the glass blower and describe what I need. A flat disc, 2 handspans in diameter, as even as he can grind it, with a small hole bored through the center for the axle. He says 9 copper. I say 7 and point out that a flat disc is simpler work than a bottle with a neck. He says 8. I give him 8 and come back in a week. The disc is not perfect. There is a slight warp toward one edge that will cause a wobble on the axle. I consider going back and arguing, but the warp is minor, and a small wobble will not stop the experiment from working. I take it and build the frame that evening. The frame is simple. 2 upright posts with notched tops to hold the axle, a crossbar at the base for stability, 2 wool pads mounted on adjustable arms so I can press them against both faces of the disc with enough pressure to create friction without stopping the rotation. The whole thing is the size of a bread loaf. I mount it on a flat board and test the rotation by spinning the axle with my fingers. The disc turns. The wobble is there but manageable. The wool pads press against the glass and drag slightly. I feel the resistance, but the disc keeps turning. I attach a short copper wire to a metal strip pressed against the rim of the disc. I run the wire to the inner contact of the glass vessel. I spin the axle. From the wire's end, where it meets the vessel contact, I can see small sparks firing in a steady rhythm. 1 per rotation, roughly, each one tiny. I keep spinning. The sparks keep coming. After 2 minutes of spinning, I stop and do the discharge test on the vessel. The snap is noticeably harder than a single amber charge. Not dramatically harder. The disc is small. The pads are small. The rotation is slow because my hand is doing it, but measurably more. More rotations equals more charge. The relationship is direct and consistent. The principle works. I sit back and look at the device on the board in front of me. If my hand can add charge with every rotation, a shaft turning at the speed I watched today can add charge hundreds of times per minute. A large disc instead of a small one means more surface area and more force per rotation. Multiple vessels in line means more total storage. I say it out loud quietly to nobody. If the wind turns it instead of my hand, it runs by itself. The device on the board is a toy. The thing I'm describing is something else. I need to build it bigger, and I need a real source of rotation, not my hand. I start making a list of materials for the full-scale version. Large glass disc. Expensive. Multiple vessel assemblies. I can make more. It takes time, not money. Copper wire. Substantial length. Very expensive. Metal framework to handle real rotational forces. Needs a blacksmith. A housing for the wool pads that maintains consistent pressure automatically. I have a design. It needs metal fittings I cannot fabricate myself. The total cost of what I need is more than I will earn in 3 months of saving. That is assuming nothing breaks during testing, which it will because first versions always break. I need either more money or a different approach to getting the materials. 3 days later, Hugo finds me. I am in the loft doing a second test run on the small generator, spinning the disc, watching the sparks when I hear his heavy step on the ladder. He appears at the top, looks at the device, looks at me, and then his expression shifts to the one he uses when something has gone wrong with the mill. "Where did you get the wool for those pads?" he says. I know immediately. The wool came from a small bale in the storage corner that Hugo keeps for packing fragile items and shipments. I took 2 handfuls 3 weeks ago when I thought I would not need much. The storage bale, I say. I know which bale. He looks at it. That is my property. I should have asked. You should have asked. His voice is flat and even, which is worse than if he shouted. I have workers take things without asking, and then I have no workers. That is how it goes. He is right. I do not argue with that. Before you decide, I say come down to the secondary gear housing. He looks at me. Why? Because I fixed it. The secondary gear housing has had a problem for 3 months. One of the intermediate gear wheels developed a wobble at the axle seat. The seat wore unevenly and the gear started losing contact with the adjacent tooth on every second rotation. The result is a faint clicking sound and a gradual loss of efficiency in the secondary stone. Hugo had the smith look at it once. The smith said the gear needed replacing, which meant ordering a new casting, which was expensive and slow. I machined the axle seat flat using a file, a flat reference plate I borrowed from the metalsmith's stall, and about 8 hours of careful work, over 3 evenings. Then I shimmed the fit with a strip of hardened leather to take up the new clearance. The wobble is gone, the clicking is gone. The secondary stone runs as smoothly as it did when the mill was new. Hugo crouches next to the housing and puts his hand on it while it runs, feeling for the vibration that used to be there. He stands up. He looks at the gear. He looks at me. "You did this," he says. "Yes." He is quiet for a moment. Then, "Bring back the wool you took." He goes back upstairs. He does not fire me. I return 2 handfuls of wool to the bale that afternoon. I replace them with wool I buy from the market the following day, the same amount, the same quality. Net cost to me, 3 copper. Net result, I still have the job, the roof, and the food. But the materials problem is not solved. 7 copper in savings and a list of components that cost 30 at minimum. Hugo will let me stay, but he will not fund experiments. The tavern work is at capacity. I'm already taking every available shift. I need a different source, not an employer. Someone who sees what this could become and decides it is worth investing in before it is finished. I do not know anyone like that yet, but I know what they look like. Someone who makes decisions based on numbers, not on what they were told to believe. Someone who has seen enough of the world to recognize when something new is real. I go back to the loft and add 1 more item to the list. Find that person. I find Marco by accident on a Thursday market morning. I'm walking the metalsmith row looking at wire prices. I need copper wire for the generator, and I have been tracking what different sellers charge, so I know what is fair before I commit to buying. The third stall belongs to a young man who looks about 25, broad through the shoulders, with burn marks on his forearms from forge work, and a friendly expression that suggests he has never once suspected anyone of anything. He has copper wire on a small wooden spool, labeled with a price scratched into the wood. The price is less than half of what the other 2 stalls are asking. Not a discount, not a special offer. Just wrong, he has set the price without knowing the actual market rate, and anyone who walks by and buys from him is taking the difference out of his pocket. I stand there for a moment. I could buy the wire at his price, get what I need for less than I budgeted, and walk away. That is the obvious move. I do not do that. Your wire is priced wrong, I tell him. He looks up from the ring he is filing. Wrong how? 2 stalls north of here is selling the same gauge for 11 copper per spool. You're asking 5. You're losing 6 copper every time someone buys from you. He puts down the file and looks at the price scratched on the spool. Then he looks at me. He is not angry. He looks genuinely puzzled, like a man who has just been told something obvious that he somehow missed. "Why are you telling me?" he says. "You could have bought it yourself." "Because I need a metalworker who can make precise parts, not a one-time purchase. A one-time purchase gets me wire. A metalworker gets me everything I need for the next year. He looks at me for a long moment. Then he laughs, a short, surprised laugh, like the situation is funny to him and he is willing to admit it. How old are you? 16? 16, he repeats. He picks up the spool and looks at the price again, then sets it down. What kind of parts? His name is Marco. He makes cheap jewelry for the market, custom metal fittings for craftsmen who need small components, and occasional decorative ironwork for houses. His hands are excellent. The file work I can see on the ring he was working is precise and clean. His bookkeeping is a disaster. His pricing is done by feel and instinct, which means it is sometimes right and often wrong. He has no system, no ledger, and no way of knowing at the end of a month whether he made money or lost it. I explain what I need: a metal axle, smooth and straight to within a hair's width, with specific shoulder dimensions, 2 friction contact strips of thin copper, bent to a radius that matches a glass disc, a set of 4 terminal posts, threaded at the base for attachment, a wire clamp with a set screw, all to dimensions I will provide in a drawn diagram. He listens to the list. When I finish, he says, "What does this make?" A device that produces a continuous stream of the amber force. He is quiet for a moment. The amber force. You have heard of it? I know amber sticks to things when you rub it. I thought that was just a thing amber does. It is a thing everything does if you rub it the right way. Amber is just the easiest to demonstrate. The force can be channeled through metal, stored in glass vessels, and released on demand. I have working prototypes of the storage component. I need the generation component built to a larger scale. He looks at me with the expression of a person who is not sure if they are being talked to sensibly or not. I will be honest, he says. I do not fully understand what you just said. You do not need to understand it. You need to make the parts to the dimensions I give you. I will handle the rest. And you pay me how? I cannot pay you in coin right now. I can pay you in something else. I will go through your pricing, your costs, and your records, and I will fix them. You will know what things actually cost you to make, what you should charge, and what you're actually earning. Within a month, you will know your real numbers. After that, if the device works and I sell anything from it, I pay you back in coin for all the parts. He is quiet again. He looks at the spool of wire with the wrong price on it. My father set prices, he says. I kept them the same after he died. Your father's prices may have been right when he set them. Material costs have changed. I can show you what they are now. He nods slowly. He picks up the file and holds it for a moment without using it. Come back tomorrow with your diagrams, he says. I will look at them. I come back the next morning with 3 pages of drawings. Marco spreads them on his workbench and looks at them for a long time, tilting his head at the dimensions, tracing the assembly sequence with one thick finger. He asks 2 questions, one about the axle shoulder clearance, one about the contact strip geometry. Both are good questions. He is reading the drawings correctly. I can make these, he says. We shake hands on the arrangement. Over the next 2 weeks, I go through Marco's records with him. He does not keep a real ledger, just a box of notes and receipts that I sort into categories on his workbench on 2 evenings. I calculate his actual material costs for each product type, compare them to his prices, and write out a new price list. In the process, I find that he has been selling silver wire rings at a slight loss for the past year, because the silver price went up and he did not adjust. He has also been significantly undercharging for custom fittings while slightly overcharging for standard market jewelry, which means his best customers, the craftsmen who order the fittings, are his biggest source of loss. I write him a 1-page summary. He reads it slowly, his lips moving. When he finishes, he sits back and says, I have been running this stall for 4 years. Yes, I have probably lost more than 30 silver in that time from wrong prices. Closer to 40, based on what I can reconstruct. Some of it is hard to calculate without better records from earlier years. He is quiet for a moment. Then, I will make your parts for free. We agreed on future repayment. I am changing the agreement. You just found 40 silver I did not know I had lost. The parts are free. I do not argue with this. It takes Marco 3 months to complete all the components, not because any single piece is difficult, but because he fits the work around his regular orders, and there are many small adjustments as I test partial assemblies and come back with revised dimensions. The axle needed to be 5% thinner at the bearing seat. The contact strips needed a spring-loaded arm added so the pressure stays consistent as the disc warms and expands slightly. The terminal posts needed to be moved 3 finger widths apart to prevent arcing between them. Each adjustment cost a trip back to Marco's stall and 2 or 3 days of waiting. I used the waiting time to build the vessel bank, 4 glass jars, each lined with foil inside and out, connected in sequence so that force flows from the first to the last, and the total storage is 4 times what a single jar provides. By early winter, the full assembly is complete and sitting on a board on Marco's workbench. It takes up about the same space as a large cooking pot. The glass disc is 2 handspans wide, mounted on the machined axle, with the wool friction pads pressing against both faces. 4 jars in a row behind it, connected by thin copper wire. 2 output terminals at the end of the chain where I can connect whatever I want to discharge through. I put 2 short charcoal sticks, the densest, hardest charcoal I could find, cut to matching lengths and pointed at the tips, into wooden holders on adjustable arms that let me position the tips close together without touching. Marco stands opposite me across the workbench. Ready? I say. No, he says, but do it anyway. I spin the axle. The disc rotates. The wool pads hiss against the glass. From the contact strip I can hear the faint, rapid clicking of continuous small sparks feeding into the first jar. I spin faster. The clicking speeds up. I spin for 30 seconds, filling the jars. Then I bring the charcoal tips close together, a gap of about 3 finger widths between them. The arc comes out white, not a spark, not a flash. A sustained bridge of white light between the two tips, steady and bright, filling the shadowed corner of Marco's workshop, with more light than all 3 of his work candles combined. It does not flicker. It does not pulse. It burns with a clean, even brightness and a low hiss that I can feel in my back teeth. Marco drops both charcoal holders onto the workbench and takes a step back. His hand goes to his chest in the automatic gesture of someone reaching for a religious symbol. Is that from the devil, he says? It is from friction, I say. The disc rubs against the wool. The wool produces the force. The force travels through the jars and releases between the charcoal tips. No devil involved. He stares at the arc for another moment. It begins to fade as the jars drain. 10 seconds, then dimming, then out. All right, he says. He picks up the holders from the bench. He crosses himself once more, quickly, as if hoping I will not notice. All right, I believe you. I reload the jars and run it again. This time Marco holds one of the charcoal sticks himself and I manage the other. The arc jumps between them, white, steady, bright. He holds his breath the whole time it is burning. When it goes out, he exhales. How long can you make it last, he asks. As long as the jars hold charge. Right now, 10 to 15 seconds before they drain, but that is because the jars drain faster than this small disc refills them. I tap the glass disc. If I spin this faster, or use a larger disc, the jars stay fuller longer. And if the disc is turned by a wheel instead of by hand, something that spins continuously, the jars would never drain below a certain level. A wheel, Marco says, like a mill wheel. Exactly like a mill wheel. He looks at the assembly on the bench. He looks at me. You're going to put this on a roof somewhere, he says. On a roof, yes, with a wind sail to turn the disc. The wind spins the sail turns the disc fills the jars run the light. As long as the wind blows, the light burns. Marco sits down on his stool. I know what he is thinking because I have been thinking it for months. This is not a market curiosity. This is not a trick or a demonstration. If it works at scale, if the disc is large enough and the jars are numerous enough, this is a light source that does not need candles, does not need oil, does not need to be tended through the night. It runs on wind. Wind costs nothing. But the jars are still the problem. The arc burns for 15 seconds on a full charge. If the disc spins continuously, it can keep the jars partially charged, which means the arc burns longer, but not indefinitely, and not as brightly as a full discharge. The jar capacity needs to be much larger, or the jars need to hold their charge longer, or both. I start testing that same week. I add liquid to the jars. The theory is that a conducting liquid between the foil layers might allow more force to accumulate than foil alone. I try water. Marginal improvement. I try vinegar. Noticeably better. The jars hold charge for almost twice as long before the arc fades. I try salt water, somewhere between the two. I do not know why vinegar works better than water. I record the result precisely. Concentration, temperature, jar dimensions, discharge time, and move on. Understanding why comes later. Right now, I need what works, not why it works. I write in my notes that evening, vinegar jars hold the force longer. Larger jars will hold more. A larger disc will fill them faster. If all 3 scale up together, the light can be made to last as long as the wind lasts. The wind lasts all night. This is solvable. Hugo figures it out before I tell him. I ask him, carefully and indirectly, whether any of the rooms in the mill building have roof access, a hatch or a low section of roof that could be reached from inside. He listens to the question. He looks at me for a moment. Then he asks why. I tell him I need to test a larger version of the device I have been building. It needs wind. The mill roof would be a good location. He is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "You're leaving." It is not a question, so I do not answer it as one. "You can stay," he says. "Room with roof access, same wage, same meals. One condition. Half of whatever you earn from that device comes to me." The mill gave you the idea that is worth something. I think about this for exactly as long as it takes me to understand what half means in practice. Half means that every arrangement I make with anyone, every sale, every contract, every fee, Hugo takes 50% before I see any of it. Half means that if the device becomes worth real money, Hugo, who contributed a roof and an idea about wind that I already had, earns as much as I do. Half means I spend the next unknown number of years working for a man who will have full claim on half my output without contributing anything further. No, I say. Hugo's expression does not change. Then you leave. Then I work out the week because I said I would, and because I need the final wage. On Friday I collect my pay. Thank Hugo in the same flat tone he has always used with me, and carry my sack and my equipment out of the mill loft for the last time. The room I find costs twice what the mill was paying me. 6 copper a week for a narrow room on the 3rd floor of a house near the East Market. The landlord is a dry man named Peter, who is not interested in what his tenants do, as long as they pay on time and do not cause fires. The room has one feature I specifically looked for and found, a wooden hatch in the ceiling that opens onto a flat section of the roof behind the building's main chimney, sheltered on 3 sides by parapet walls and exposed to the prevailing west wind on the 4th. It is not a mill, it is a roof hatch above a rented room. It is mine. I build the wind sail over 3 weeks, working evenings at Marco's stall on the metal fittings and early mornings in my room on the wooden assembly. The design is simple. 4 blades arranged around a central hub, each blade a flat panel of stretched linen on a light wooden frame. The hub mounts on a vertical post that goes through the roof hatch and connects by a short shaft to the generator below. When the blades turn, the shaft turns the glass disc, and the disc charges the jars. The blade span is about the width of my outstretched arms. It is not large. I'm not trying to grind grain, I'm trying to spin a glass disc. I install it on a still morning, which turns out to be a practical mistake. I cannot test anything because there is no wind. I wait. The next day has a light breeze, and the blades rotate slowly. The shaft turns at a walking pace, and the clicking from the generator tells me force is reaching the jars, but slowly. I hold the charcoal tips together. A thin arc, more aglow than a light, technically working. The day after that, the wind comes in from the west with real force. The blades accelerate. I can hear the shaft picking up speed. The clicking from the generator becomes a continuous hiss. I sit in my room with the charcoal holders and I bring the tips close together. The arc jumps out white and stays. I hold it for 30 seconds, a minute. The jars are being refilled faster than the arc drains them, which means the light is stable. It does not flicker. It does not fade. As long as the wind pushes the blades at this speed, the light burns. I sit there and look at it. I have been in dark rooms my entire life. Every room I have ever slept in went dark at night. The candle blown out to save the wax. The fire banked to save the wood. The moon only useful when the sky was clear and the window faced the right direction. Dark was the default state of every night I have ever lived through. This room is not dark. The arc throws white light across the floor and up the walls, harder and cleaner than any candle I have ever seen. It is not warm light. It is not soft. It is the same light that comes off the charcoal tips when the force runs through them, sharp and white, and completely indifferent to what time of day it is. I sit with it for a long time. Then I go back to work, because the next problem is already obvious, and I have been thinking about it for 2 weeks. The wind is not constant. While I was sitting there watching the arc burn steadily, the wind dropped for about 20 seconds, a lull between gusts, and the arc thinned and nearly went out, before the next gust hit and brought it back. If this system is going to be useful to anyone, it cannot flicker every time the wind pauses. A man trying to read by this light would be worse off than with a candle. A candle at least burns steadily. I write down 2 problems with their names because naming problems helps me think about them separately. The first problem is smoothing. The force coming from the generator varies with wind speed. Fast wind, strong output, slow wind, weak output, no wind, nothing. I need a way to even out this variation so that whatever draws from the system receives a consistent supply, regardless of what the wind is doing at that moment. The second problem is storage. When there is no wind at all, calm nights, still mornings, the system produces nothing. For the light to work through the night, it needs to store enough force during windy periods to cover the still ones. The jars help with both problems, but not enough. They smooth out very short fluctuations. A 2-second lull is invisible because the jars hold enough charge to cover it, but a 10-minute lull drains them. A still night empties them completely. I need something that holds much more charge than the jars. I go back to the experiments with liquids. I have been running these since the bench tests with Marco, testing different materials to see what holds the force longest and in what quantity. The vinegar-soaked jars held charge longer than dry foil. The question now is what holds even more. I start testing metals and acid solutions, building on what the vinegar results suggested. If the force can accumulate in the liquid layer between 2 metal plates, then the question becomes which metal holds the most, and which liquid allows it to accumulate without draining away. Lead and vinegar gave the first useful result. I now try lead and stronger acid. I get a dilute sulfuric solution from an alchemist's supply shop, the kind used in some dye-fixing processes, and test it against the vinegar. The discharge is noticeably stronger from the same size plate. I build a proper test cell, 2 lead plates, each the size of my palm, facing each other with a gap of about 1 finger width, suspended in a ceramic jar filled with the acid solution. Copper wire terminals bolted to each plate. I charge it from the generator for an hour while the wind is strong. Then I disconnect the generator and connect the charcoal tips. The arc burns for over 20 minutes from a single cell. I build 5 more cells and connect them in a chain, an hour of charging. Then I disconnect the generator, close the roof hatch against the night, and sit in a completely still room with no wind at all. The arc burns. It burns for an hour before it begins to fade. An hour of stored light from 2 hours of wind charging. The ratio is not good enough for practical use yet. I need it closer to 3 or 4 hours of light per hour of charging, but the principle is sound. The cells store force in the acid-metal reaction, release it steadily, and recharge from the generator when the wind returns. I bring Marco to see it the following week. I close all the shutters in the room, seal the gap under the door with a cloth, and wait for evening. When it is fully dark outside, I connect the arc holders and turn the small release valve on the cell bank. White light fills the room. Marco stands in the middle of it. He is a large man, and he casts a sharp-edged shadow on the wall behind him. He looks at his own hands. He looks at the shadow. He turns around slowly, looking at the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all clearly visible in the middle of the night in a shuttered room. He says, Adrian, this is not just experiments anymore. I know 2 days later I go to the collegiate. I have a specific reason. I want to find books on metal reactions in acid solutions because I'm accumulating experimental results faster than I can build theory to explain them, and knowing the theory would help me design better cells. The collegiate library is the only place in the city likely to have anything useful. The librarian sends me to a professor. The professor, the same one from the tavern, though he does not remember me, receives me in his office with the particular patience of a man who has decided, before the conversation starts, that it will not be worth his time. I explain what I'm looking for: treatises on the behavior of metals when exposed to acid solutions, particularly anything related to the amber force. He listens for 3 minutes. Then he tells me the amber force cannot accumulate in liquid. This is established. The force exists in solid materials, amber, glass, sulfur, and dissipates immediately upon contact with any conducting substance, including water or acid. What you're describing is physically impossible. I have a working cell that does it, I say. You have a device that produces a result you are misinterpreting, he says. The result is light, an arc between 2 charcoal sticks, sustained for an hour from a stored charge in a lead-acid cell. I am happy to demonstrate it. He looks at me the way he looked at me in the tavern, the same expression like I am a noise that has overstayed its time. He says, young man, if lead plates and acid were capable of storing the amber force, someone would have discovered this already. The absence of that discovery suggests the phenomenon does not exist as you describe it. Several students in the corridor outside have stopped to listen. One of them smiles. Or, I say, it suggests nobody tested it. I will not debate first principles with a mill hand. He nods toward the door. The library does not loan books to unaffiliated visitors. Good day, I leave without the books. I am not angry. I expected nothing and received nothing. But I notice one thing as I walk back through the collegiate courtyard. The professor, for all his certainty that my results were impossible, did not ask to see them. A man who was genuinely confident in his position would have been curious enough to look. He was not curious. He was afraid of what looking might show him. I file that away. I will come back to this building one day not for books, not to debate first principles. I will come back when the light is already burning above this city and there is nothing left to argue about. For now I have cells that need improving and a roof that needs a larger sail. 3 components. That is what I have. The wind sail on the roof turns the generator. The generator charges the cells run the lamp. Wind goes in one end, light comes out the other. The chain works. Every part of it I built myself or had Marco build to my specifications, and I understand every part of it well enough to fix it when it breaks. The question now is not whether it works. It works. The question is whether it works well enough for someone else to use without me standing next to it. That is a completely different standard, and I am not there yet. The first problem I cannot ignore any longer is the lamp rods. The charcoal tips produce the arc by allowing the force to jump the gap between them. As they burn, they get shorter. The gap widens. Past a certain width, the arc cannot bridge it and goes out. In the current design, I have to reach in and manually advance both rods closer together every 40 minutes, or the light fails. This is not a product. This is an experiment that requires constant supervision. I test every carbon material I can get my hands on. Regular charcoal, the kind used for heating and cooking, burns fast. Within 20 minutes, the tips are half their starting length and the arc is already losing stability. Usable in an emergency, not usable for a light source. Coke, which is what the city's iron foundries use for high-temperature smelting, burns slower. The tips hold their shape for almost twice as long. Better, but still not good enough. The coke also produces a slight smell when it arcs. Not dangerous, but noticeable in a closed room. The useful find comes from a stationary supplier at the South Market who sells writing implements. He stocks graphite sticks, compressed graphite from mining waste, formed into cylinders for writing and drawing. I buy 3, take them back to the room, cut them to rod length and test. The graphite tips barely burn at all. They erode, slowly, as the arc runs through them. But where charcoal shortens by a finger width in 20 minutes, the graphite shortens by the width of a fingernail in the same time. The arc between graphite tips burns with a slightly different quality than charcoal, a little bluer, a little more stable, and it runs for over 3 hours before the gap becomes too wide. 3 hours of continuous light from a single set of rods without adjustment. I show this to Marco. He watches the arc run for a while, then asks, "Can you make the rods advance automatically, so the gap closes by itself as they burn?" I look at the holder design. The rods sit in fixed clamps. If I replace the fixed clamps with spring-loaded ones, a gentle spring pressing each rod toward the center, the tips would advance as they erode, and the gap would stay constant. It takes me 2 weeks to design and test the spring mechanism. Marco machines the parts. The result is a lamp that adjusts itself. Load the rods, connect the terminals, and the arc runs until the rods are consumed, maintaining its own gap the entire time. I write in my notes, graphite rods, spring advance, 4 hours minimum per set. This is the lamp. The second problem is the cell bank. The ceramic jars I built the early cells in were temporary. I knew they were temporary, but I kept using them longer than I should have, because they worked well enough for testing. They do not work well enough for a product. The acid eats into the clay over time, seeping through microscopic cracks in the glaze, and eventually pools on the wooden base of the cell rack, and begins eating through that too. I noticed the damage after 3 months and replaced the rack before anything serious happened, but the next person who owns this system will not necessarily be watching for it. I bring the problem to Marco. He thinks for a day and comes back with a suggestion. Cast lead boxes. Lead resists the acid completely, is easy to cast in simple shapes, and Marco already works with it for jewelry and fittings. The boxes will be heavy, significantly heavier than ceramic, but weight is not a concern for a cell bank that sits in a fixed location. He casts 6 boxes to my dimensions. I assemble new cells inside them, seal the lids with a lead strip folded over the edge, and run a 3-week test with the full system operating daily. No leaks, no seepage. The floor beneath the cell rack stays dry. I write, lead cast cell enclosures. No maintenance, no seepage risk. This is the storage unit. The third problem almost causes a fire. I'm running the full system one evening. Wind sail charging, cells at capacity, lamp burning, when I notice that the copper wire running from the cell bank to the lamp is warm. Not hot, not immediately dangerous, but noticeably warm along its full length. I have been using thin wire because thin wire is cheap and the runs inside my room are short. But as I have added more cells to the bank and increased the force available, the wire has started carrying more than it was sized for. I put my hand along the wire and find the warmest section, near the cell terminals where the force density is highest. I disconnect the system and sit with this force moving through a wire produces heat. Too much force through too thin a wire produces too much heat. This is not a problem in my current setup because the runs are short and I can monitor them. It would be a serious problem in a larger installation, a house or a building, where the wires run inside walls and under floors where nobody would see them heating up. I need to know the relationship between wire thickness and the amount of force it can carry safely. I do not have enough knowledge of the underlying mechanics to calculate this, so I test it instead. I run different wire gauges at different force levels and measure the temperature difference against the ambient air. It takes 3 weeks of careful measurement to build a table. At this force level, use at least this gauge of wire. Below that, and it gets warm. Significantly below that, and it is a fire risk. Marco looks at the table when I show it. So there's a minimum wire size for every level of force. Yes. If the system produces more force than the wire can carry, the wire heats. If the wire heats long enough in a confined space, it ignites whatever is around it. And the fix is thicker wire, or shorter runs, or both. For any installation I do, I will specify the wire gauge based on the expected force level. That specification is part of the product. Marco nods. He pauses. Then Adrian, what do you call the force when it is moving through the wire? I have been thinking about this for months, actually. The treatises call it the amber force. That name makes sense for the force sitting in a charged piece of amber, but it does not describe what happens in a wire. In a wire it moves. It flows. It has a direction from the cell bank, through the lamp, back to the other terminal. It circulates. Current, I say. It flows like a current of water. I have been calling it that in my notes for a while. And the lamp? A current lamp. Or a light device. I have not settled on that one yet. What about the whole system? The sail and the cells and the lamp together? I think about this. A current system. The sail generates it. The cells store it. The lamp uses it. Current is what they all have in common. Marco laughs. The short surprise laugh. I have come to recognize as his version of being impressed. You name everything. If you cannot name a thing, you cannot describe it to someone else. If you cannot describe it, you cannot sell it or teach it or improve it. Names are not decorative. He accepts this with a nod. By the time I have the wire table, the graphite rods, and the lead cells all integrated and tested together, the system has been running in my room for 4 months without a failure that was not my own fault. The lamp burns 4 hours per rod set, adjusts its own gap, and sits in a cast iron housing Marco made that can be mounted on a wall. The cell bank fits in a wooden cabinet with lead-lined interior that holds 6 cells and powers the lamp through a still night on a full charge. The wind sail charges the cells in about 3 hours of moderate wind. Marco tells me one evening that I should show it to people. We are sitting in my room with the lamp burning between us, both of us visible in the white light, and he says it plainly. Enough testing. Show it to someone who matters. I know he is right. I also know what happens if I show it too early. A single public failure is not just a setback. In a city this size, word travels between the merchants and the tradesmen in a matter of days. If I demonstrate to someone important and the lamp flickers, or the cells drain too fast, or a wire heats and I have to stop the demonstration, that story becomes the story about my device, not the 4 months of successful operation in my room, the one demonstration that went wrong. I'm not ready to absorb that risk yet. I give it 2 more months. I test every failure scenario I can think of. Low wind, no wind, cold temperatures that affect the cell chemistry, the lamp running longer than planned, the cells overcharged. I document the failure conditions and add safeguards where I can. A ceramic break in the main wire line that will fail harmlessly before the wire gets dangerously hot. A pressure valve on the cell lids for the rare case when the acid produces gas faster than normal. When the 2 months are up, I have a list of 107 tests run. The system has failed in controllable ways 3 times, uncontrollably, 0. I make a final clean copy of the full specifications, dimensions, materials, assembly sequence, operating instructions, maintenance schedule, 11 pages. Marco cannot read them, but he listens while I walk him through the content, asking practical questions at each stage. When I finish, he says, "Who are you going to show it to first?" I have been thinking about this for weeks. The answer is not complicated once you think about it correctly. You do not start with the people who are easiest to reach. You start with the person whose opinion changes everyone else's opinion. The richest man in the city, I say. Marco raises his eyebrows. Haas. He will not see you. He will if I give him the right reason. I start working on that next. The demonstration unit takes me a week to build. It is a scaled-down version of the full system, a small hand-crank generator instead of the wind sail, since I cannot bring a rooftop installation to a meeting, and a single lamp with graphite rods in the spring advance holder. The cells are 2 lead units, enough to run the lamp for 40 minutes without the crank. The whole thing fits on a board I can carry under one arm. The pitch is simple. I light the lamp. I let it run. I explain the 3 components and what each one costs to maintain. Then I stop talking and let the numbers do the rest. I have a list of 7 people in the city who have enough money to invest in something new and enough commercial sense to understand a cost argument. I start at the top of the list and work down. The first meeting is with Renz, a cloth merchant who runs the largest dry goods operation in the Eastern Market District. I know him by reputation. He is considered shrewd, which means he responds to numbers and not to enthusiasm. I request a meeting through his clerk, and am given 20 minutes on a Tuesday morning. I set up the demonstration board on the corner of his desk. I crank the generator for 2 minutes to charge the cells, then connect the lamp terminals. The arc comes up clean and white. Renz watches it. He does not lean forward. He does not change his expression light. He says, "Yes, what does it cost to install?" I give him the figure. He nods slowly. And candles. I give him the weekly candle cost for a merchant operation his size, based on what I can estimate from the number of rooms his building has and standard burning hours. He looks at the lamp. He looks at me. Candles are cheaper. He says, "Per week, yes. Over a year the installation pays for itself, and after that your light costs nothing. Wind does not have a price. Wind is not always there. The cells store enough charge for a still night. 2 still nights in a row is uncommon. 3 in a row, in my experience over the past year of operation, has not happened. In your experience," he repeats, "which is 1 year in 1 location, 1 rooftop." He leans back. "What you have is an interesting device. What you do not have is a track record. Candles have worked for 1,000 years. Your machine has worked for 1. He glances at the lamp, which is still burning on his desk. "Come back when this has been running in someone else's building for at least a season. Then we can discuss numbers." He is not wrong. That is the frustrating part. His reasoning is sound. He is a businessman, and he is making a rational assessment of risk against a new and unproven technology. I cannot argue with the logic. I can only note that someone has to be first, and that person will have the best terms. I tell him this. He smiles for the first time. "That is exactly the kind of thing someone says when they need a first investor." He says, "Come back when you have one." I pick up the demonstration board and leave. The candle makers' guild has their hall on the street behind the cathedral, 3 doors down from the second-hand bookseller, where I bought my first treatise on the Amber Force. The irony is not lost on me. I request a meeting with the guild chairman and am given a slot the following Thursday. The guild chairman is a heavy-set man with the careful manner of someone who has spent decades managing competing interests. He receives me in the guild hall's front room, which smells of tallow and beeswax, and listens to my introduction with a neutral expression. I explain that I am not here to compete with the guild. I am here to propose a distribution arrangement. The guild's existing network of merchants and household suppliers would carry and install my lamp systems in exchange for a percentage of each sale. The guild knows every buyer of light in the city. I know how to make a light that does not need their product. Together we could reach the market faster than I can alone. He looks at me for approximately 7 seconds. "Boy," he says, "you have come to us to ask us to help you destroy our business. I have come to ask you to be part of the new business before it replaces the old one. The transition is going to happen regardless. The question is whether the guild is on the profitable side of it or not." He looks at me for 4 more seconds. Then he stands up and opens the door to the corridor and says nothing further. 2 men from the inner office walk me out of the building. Not roughly, just firmly and without discussion. I stand on the street outside with the demonstration board under my arm and think about what I did wrong. Nothing, actually. The guild chairman understood the situation perfectly. He is protecting an existing business from a direct threat, which is rash. He is not going to help me accelerate that threat regardless of the financial argument, because the financial argument only works if the new technology succeeds, and his entire professional identity is built around the assumption that it will not. I file the Candle Guild as a closed door and move on. The collegiate visit I almost skip. I know how it will go. But I want the professor to see the working device, for reasons that have more to do with my own record-keeping than with any realistic hope of support. I want the fact of the demonstration on the table. I carry the board to the collegiate on a Wednesday afternoon and request 10 minutes with the professor of natural philosophy. His assistant makes me wait 40 minutes in the corridor. Students pass and glance at the board under my arm. The professor receives me in his lecture room. He looks at the demonstration board with an expression that is carefully neutral, the expression of a man who has decided not to show surprise regardless of what he sees. I set up the board, charge the cells, connect the lamp, the arc comes up. White light fills the end of the lecture room nearest his desk. He watches it for a full minute, longer than either of the previous two. Then, an interesting device, he says. What principle does it operate on? I explain. Friction generates current. Current stores in the cells. Cells discharge through the lamp. I use the word current, which he has not heard in this context before, and I watch him register that I am using a word he does not recognize for a phenomenon he cannot immediately categorize. This current, he says. You're describing the amber force. I'm describing the amber force in motion, the amber force at rest. In a charged piece of amber is the static condition. The same force flowing through a conductor is the dynamic condition. I call the dynamic condition current because it flows at. He considers this. And you claim the lead acid cells store this current. They store it. Yes, that jar on the left has been holding a charge for 3 days. I charged it 72 hours ago and have not touched it since. He looks at the jar. He looks at the arc, which is still burning, steady and white. This contradicts the established understanding of the amber force, he says finally. The amber force does not persist in conducting materials. This is foundational. Aristotle never tested lead plates in acid solution, I say. Aristotle was not required to test every conceivable configuration of materials. His framework of natural principles is sufficient to. His framework predicts this should not work, I say. It works. When the prediction and the result disagree, one of them is wrong. The professor's expression does not change, but something behind it does, a slight tightening. The way a man's face looks when he has been said something he cannot immediately refute and does not want to admit. This is an interesting demonstration of a mechanical effect, he says. I would not characterize it as a scientific finding without peer review and theoretical grounding. As a curiosity, it has merit. As evidence for revising established natural philosophy, it does not. I'm not asking you to revise anything, I say. I'm asking whether the collegiate would be willing to purchase a current system for one of its buildings. A long pause. The collegiate does not invest in unproven commercial devices. I pack up the board. I thank him for his time, which costs me nothing to say, and which he receives with the expression of a man who knows he is being handled politely. In the corridor outside, I pass 3 students who are watching from the door. One of them, young, maybe 17, looks at the board under my arm and then looks at me with an expression that is not dismissive, more like hungry. He starts to say something and then stops. I keep walking. I will think about that student later. The city hall meeting takes another 2 weeks to arrange. I work through a city clerk I know from my old letter delivery days, who knows the deputy administrator, who eventually gets me 15 minutes on a Thursday afternoon with the city head himself, a man named Brenner, who has administered this city for 11 years, and has the manner of someone who has heard every proposal twice already. I do not bring the demonstration board. Brenner is not going to be convinced by a light in a box. He is going to be convinced by a contract proposal, or not at all. I bring a single sheet of paper instead, a cost comparison between current oil lamp street lighting and a current system for the same 20-block area of the city center, showing installation cost, annual maintenance, and 5-year total cost of ownership. Brenner reads the sheet while I sit opposite him. He reads it in about 2 minutes. Then he sets it down. We have lamplighters, he says. They light the oil lamps every evening. 30 years of reliable service. Oil prices have increased every year for the past decade. The trend continues. Your current street lighting costs more each year to run than the year before. My lamplighters have families. I had anticipated this. A current system requires maintenance, regular rod replacement, cell inspection, wire checks. Your lamplighters can be trained to do this. Same workforce, different task. Brenner looks at me. He is not a stupid man. I can see him processing the argument, finding it logically coherent, and then setting it aside for a different reason. You're 19 years old, he says. Yes, you have 1 installation on your own roof. Correct. You're asking the city to contract with you for street lighting based on 1 installation on your own roof, which you have been running for 1 year. I'm offering a demonstration period. Install a test section, 5 lamps, 1 block at my cost. Run it for 3 months. If it performs as specified, we discuss a full contract. He looks at the sheet again. Boy, he says, go home. I fold the sheet and put it in my coat. I walk back through the city center in the late afternoon, past the oil lamps that the lamplighters will come to light in 2 hours. I look at them as I pass. They are functional. They have been here for 30 years. They cost money to maintain, and that cost goes up every year, and nobody in City Hall thinks about this, because it has always been the cost and always will be. I stop at the corner and look at 1 lamppost for a moment. Every person I spoke to this week said no for the same underlying reason. They have not seen this work somewhere they trust. Renz said come back when someone else has it. The collegiate said come back with peer review. Brenner said come back when you have more than 1 roof. They are all waiting for someone else to go first. The man whose opinion changes everyone else's opinion in this city is Haas. Every merchant knows him. Every city official deals with him. If Haas installs a current system and it works through a full season, Renz will come to me before I finish my morning coffee the next day. I need to get to Haas. I start planning that evening. Getting to Haas takes 3 weeks. He is not inaccessible in the way that nobles are inaccessible. No titles, no court protocol, no requirement to approach through official channels. He is inaccessible in the way that very busy, very wealthy men are inaccessible. His time is worth more than most people earn in a month. He knows it, and the people around him exist partly to enforce that arithmetic. His clerk screens every meeting request. His steward screens what reaches the clerk. His head of household screens what reaches the steward. I need to get past all three of them without a letter of introduction, without a known name, and without money to make the access problem go away through a direct payment. I spend 3 days simply learning his operation. Haas runs 3 warehouses on the river dock: cloth, spices, and mixed dry goods, plus a grain storage facility at the north edge of the city. He has 12 regular ships on contract, 6 of his own, and a workforce of about 40 people at the docks, plus another 20 in his counting house and household. The dock work is the most fluid part of his operation. He takes on temporary laborers regularly during high-traffic seasons, and the current month is a high-traffic season. I go to the dock hiring yard on a Monday morning with 30 other men looking for day work. The overseer takes on 15 of us. I am one of them. 2 days of unloading cargo gives me access to the dock environment and to the people who work there. By the end of the first day, I know who the important people are, not the overseer, who manages bodies, but the dock steward, a compact man named Veerman, who manages inventory, reconciles manifests, and knows where everything is at all times. Veerman is the operational brain of Haas's dock operation. On the second day, I help Veerman locate a discrepancy between a ship manifest and the actual goods received. A standard counting error, not theft, but the kind that creates reconciliation problems upstream in the accounting. I find it in about 10 minutes by cross-referencing 3 documents that Veerman has been comparing separately instead of simultaneously. He looks at me with the expression I have learned to recognize, the expression of a person recalibrating what they are looking at. That evening after the shift, I offer to go through his monthly reconciliation sheets and find any similar errors in exchange for an introduction to Haas's household steward. Veerman thinks for a moment. He agrees. I spend one evening on his records. There are 4 discrepancies, all small, all reconcilable. I write them up on a single sheet with the corrections. Veerman reads the sheet in the morning, looks at me once more, and 3 days later, I have a meeting with the household steward, who after a 15-minute conversation, grants me 20 minutes with Haas himself on a Friday afternoon. Haas's study is at the back of his house, away from the street, with a window that looks onto a private garden. The room is plain for someone of his wealth. Functional desk, 2 chairs, shelves of ledgers, a single decorative map on the wall. No performance of prosperity. Just a workspace. He is about 50, broad through the jaw, gray at the temples, with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that showing reactions costs him negotiating position. He looks at me for a moment as I come in. "You are the one who fixed Veerman's manifests," he says. "Yes. And you want to talk about light?" "Yes. Veerman says you make light from wind." He pauses. "I do not believe that. I'm not asking you to believe it," I say. "I am asking you to let me install my system in your house for 2 weeks at no cost to you. If it works as I describe, we discuss business. If it does not work, I remove everything, and you have lost nothing except 2 weeks of a corner of your roof." He looks at me without expression. "Nothing is free. The installation costs me materials and labor. That is my investment, not yours. You contribute a roof in 2 weeks of time. The asymmetry is intentional. It is how I earn the right to your attention." He is quiet for a moment, the stillness of a man running numbers. 2 weeks, he says. "If I find it inconvenient at any point during those 2 weeks, I want it removed within a day." "Agreed. And you touch nothing in my house except what is necessary for the installation." "Agreed." He nods once. The meeting is over. Marco and I spend 3 days on the installation. The roof of Haas's house is larger and better positioned than my rented room, an open section facing west with no surrounding buildings to block the wind, more than large enough for a sail twice the size of mine. I build a new wind sail on site, larger blades, heavier frame, bolted through the roof with lead-sealed penetrations so nothing leaks. The generator below it is the largest I have built, a disc almost a full arm span wide, with 4 wool pad assemblies instead of 2. The cell bank goes in a ground floor storage room, 12 lid cells in 2 rows, enough stored charge for 3 still nights in sequence. Marco runs the wiring, heavy gauge throughout, following the table I built, routed along wall surfaces and through drilled channels where it passes through masonry. 8 lamp housings, 2 in the main hall, 1 in the study, 1 in the bedroom corridor, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in each of 2 guest rooms, and 1 on a post beside the main gate. Each lamp has a simple switch, a lever that lifts a small bridge piece out of the circuit, breaking the connection and stopping the current to that lamp only. I invented this in the last month of testing because I realized that without individual control, every lamp in a building is on or off together. The lever is the simplest possible mechanism, 1 moving part, no failure modes. I show Haas's head of household how the switches work. He demonstrates it back to me 3 times until he is confident. I show him the cell bank and explain what the maintenance schedule looks like. Check the acid level monthly, replace the graphite rods every 3 weeks, inspect the wire connections twice a year. He writes this down. On the 3rd evening after installation, I sit in the courtyard to be available if anything needs adjustment. An hour after dark, the light in the main hall comes on. I can see it through the tall windows from the courtyard, the clean white light spreading across the ceiling, casting the window frames as sharp shadows on the garden wall. A few minutes later, the study lights, then the bedroom corridor. One by one, as Haas moves through his house and finds each switch, the building brightens from the inside. He comes out to the courtyard an hour later. He is not a man who hurries, and he does not hurry now. He walks across the courtyard and stops a few feet from me and looks at me with an expression that is as close to surprised as I think his face gets. "How long will it run tonight?" he says. "The cells are fully charged from today's wind. 12 cells at current capacity, all 8 lamps running, 6 hours before they drop below useful brightness. If the wind picks up overnight, they will recharge partially. By tomorrow evening, they will be full again. And the rods? 3 weeks before they need replacing. I will do the first replacement myself, so your man can watch the procedure." He is quiet for a moment. "What does this cost to install?" 50 silver for a house this size. That covers the sail, the generator, the cell bank, all wiring and all 8 lamps with the switches. Ongoing maintenance, rod replacements and cell checks is 5 silver per month. I supply the replacement rods. And after installation, the only recurring cost is 5 silver a month. And your own time to operate the switches. Everything else is handled. He nods slowly. He is not calculating whether he can afford it. He is calculating something else, the larger picture. I can see it in the way his eyes move slightly, the small tells of a man running a scenario he has not run before. "I want to invest," he says. "Not just buy an installation. I want to fund production. You make more of these, sell them across the city. I take 30% of revenue, 20%, I say." He looks at me. "You want volume production," I say. "Volume production means I need to hire workers, source materials at scale, and manage installations across multiple sites simultaneously. That requires my full attention and most of my capital. 20% on a large revenue base is worth more to you than 30% on a small one. I grow faster at 20. You earn more at 20. He considers this for exactly the time it takes a man to verify arithmetic he already knows is right. 25, he says. 25, I say. We shake hands in the courtyard, with the light from his own windows falling across both of us. The following week I'm in my room, going through material cost estimates for the first production run, when Marco arrives at the door with a look on his face. That means something has happened. "Renz is downstairs," he says. I go down. The cloth merchant is standing in the street outside, well dressed as always, with the controlled expression of a man who does not want to appear as interested as he is. He saw the lights in Haas's house 3 nights ago, late, well after midnight, the whole building lit up white, while every other building on the street was dark. He asked around and found out what it was. "You came to me 8 weeks ago," he says. "I did. I said come back when it was working somewhere else." "You did." He pauses. "It is working somewhere else." "It is." He waits, as if expecting me to make the pitch again. I do not. After a moment he says, "What are the terms?" "The installation terms are the same as I described in your office. 50 silver for a building your size, 5 per month maintenance." I pause. "The investment terms are different now. Haas is in at 25%. The remaining available stake is 10%. That is what I have to offer a second investor." He stares at me. "Haas got 25 and you're offering me 10. Haas took the risk when there was one installation on a rented rooftop. You waited until you saw it working in the richest house in the city. The risk premium reflects that difference." He is quiet for a long moment. 10%, he says. 10%. He agrees and he does not look happy about it. And I make sure not to look satisfied about it in front of him because he is still a useful relationship and there is no value in making him feel the loss more than he already does. After he leaves, Marco looks at me from the doorway. "You enjoyed that?" he says. "I recorded it accurately," I say. He said, "Come back when it works somewhere else." It works somewhere else. Those were his conditions, not mine. Marco shakes his head, but he is smiling. I go back to the cost estimates. 2 investors now, 25 and 10% committed, 65% mine. Enough capital coming in to start production at a real scale. I make a list of everything I need to do in the next 30 days. It is a long list. I start at the top. The workshop is on Tanner Street, 3 blocks from the river. It is a long, low building that previously housed a furniture maker who retired and whose family had no interest in continuing the business. The rent is reasonable because the smell from the tanneries 2 streets over is not. After a week, you stop noticing it. Marco says he stopped noticing it after a day. I believe him. We hire 5 workers in the first month. I need people who can do precise metal work, precise glass work, and precise assembly, and I need them to be teachable because the specific precision I need is different from what most craftsmen are used to. Normal carpentry tolerates a gap of a few millimeters. Normal metalwork tolerates a fit that is good enough to hold. Current systems do not tolerate either. A wire connection that is almost tight will heat and eventually fail. A cell casing that is almost sealed will eventually leak. Almost is not a word that belongs in the workshop. 3 of the 5 workers I hire understand this quickly. 2 of them do not, and I spend more time correcting their work than the value they add. I keep them for 2 months while I look for replacements, then let them go. The production sequence for a standard house installation: wind sail assembly, generator and mounting frame, cell bank with lead enclosures, lamp housings with spring advance rod holders, wiring cut and terminated to length, switches. Each component has a written specification with drawn diagrams showing critical dimensions. Each finished component is checked against the specification before it leaves the workshop. The first 10 installation sets sell in the first month. 8 to wealthy households in the city center, 1 to a spice merchant who wants his warehouse lit for night inventory work, 1 to a Benedictine monastery outside the city whose abbot heard about Hass's installation and sent a letter. The monastery installation is the largest single job, 22 lamps across 3 buildings, and the most logistically complex because everything has to be transported 6 miles by cart over an unpaved road. The monastery job goes well. The household jobs go mostly well. The warehouse job reveals a problem I had not anticipated. A warehouse is much larger than a house. The wire runs are much longer, and the current losses over long wire runs are greater than my table accounted for. The lamps at the far end of the warehouse are noticeably dimmer than the ones near the cell bank. I go back to the wire table and extend it. Longer runs need not just thicker wire, but also larger cell banks to compensate for the losses. I add a run length calculation to the installation specification so that every job is scoped correctly before the wiring is cut. The 2 failures happen in the same week, 6 months after installation. Both are cell bank leaks. One is at a merchant's house on the south side. One is at a guild hall I sold to on the recommendation of one of my investors. In both cases, the acid has seeped through a joint in the lead enclosure, not from corrosion, but from a casting defect. The lead was not poured evenly, and a thin section developed a crack under the weight of the liquid inside. I find out about the first leak from an angry letter delivered by a servant. I find out about the second one the same afternoon, by coincidence, when I happen to pass the guild hall and see the steward outside with a look on his face that I recognize. I visit both sites the same day. The damage is minor. Acid on a stone floor, cleaned up, no injury, but the cell banks are compromised and need to be replaced. I replace both at no charge, the same week, and I apologize to both clients in person, not through a letter. Then I go back to the workshop and spend 3 days rewriting the cell bank specification. The problem is the casting process. Marco has been pouring the lead enclosures freehand in sand molds, which produces slightly variable wall thickness. I design a metal mold, a fixed form that ensures consistent thickness in every pour, with a minimum wall dimension that will not crack under liquid weight. It takes Marco a week to make the master mold and 2 more sessions to refine it until the castings come out. Right after that, no more leaks. But the 2 incidents have already made their way through the merchant community, not catastrophically. I moved fast, fixed both without cost, and the clients are not hostile. But the story exists. Adrian's cells leaked at Franson's house. This is the version that circulates. I cannot undo that story. I can only make the next 100 installations so reliable that it becomes a footnote. The copycat appears 11 months after I open the workshop. His name is not important. What matters is that he was one of the 2 workers I let go for precision failures, and he has gone into partnership with a metalsmith on the west side of the city and is selling what he calls a wind light system. I see one at a market stall and buy it immediately and bring it back to the workshop and put it on the bench. The glass disc is thicker than mine and poorly centered on the axle. It wobbles visibly when spun, which means the wool pads make uneven contact, and the output is inconsistent. The cell enclosures are ceramic, not lead, which means they will eventually leak. The lamp housing is a simplified version of mine without the spring advance, which means the rods have to be manually adjusted every 30 minutes. The wiring is thin gauge throughout regardless of run length. It costs half of what my installation costs. I understand immediately why clients are buying it. Half price is half price. The performance problems are not visible at point of sale. They show up after 3 months of operation. And when they do show up, some clients will blame me because my design came first, and theirs is recognizably derived from it. I go to the notary on Market Street on a Tuesday morning. His name is Hoffman. He is a precise, careful man in his 60s who has been notarizing contracts and property records for 30 years and has seen approximately everything a city produces in the way of legal disputes. He looks at me with the professional neutrality of a man waiting to understand what category of problem he is dealing with. I explain, I invented these devices. I can demonstrate prior art, dated records of experiments going back 4 years, the original drawings Marco worked from, the specification documents predating any other installation in the city by more than a year. A competitor is now selling copies of my design without permission and profiting from my work. Hoffman listens carefully. When I finish, he asks, "What document are you seeking?" Something that formally records my authorship of the invention. A dated, sealed document that establishes I created it first, and that any reproduction without my permission constitutes a form of theft. He is quiet for a moment. He takes off his spectacles and cleans them, which I have come to understand is what he does when he is thinking carefully about something he has not thought about before. No such document exists in standard notarial practice, he says. Then we create one. You are a notary. You have the authority to create and seal documents that describe facts and agreements. The fact here is that I invented this system on this date as demonstrated by these records. I'm asking you to formally witness and seal that fact. He puts his spectacles back on. He looks at my documentation. He reads for several minutes. This would be a new category of notarial record, he says. Yeah, I will pay the standard registration fee plus a drafting fee for the additional work of creating the document format. He looks at me over his spectacles. Then he looks at the documentation again. I can see him thinking about the fee. I can also see him thinking about something larger, that this is an interesting problem that his 30 years have not prepared him for. and that interesting problems are not nothing when you have been doing the same work for 30 years. I will call it a charter of invention, he says. It will record the description of the device, the date of first documented operation, the name of the inventor, and a statement that any reproduction for commercial purpose without the inventor's consent is an infringement of this charter. I was calling it a protection letter, I say, but charter of invention is better. We draft it over 2 hours. He seals it with his notarial seal and the date. I pay the registration fee and leave with the original, leaving a copy in his records. 3 weeks later, I file a complaint against the copyist with the city magistrate, attaching the charter of invention as the primary document. The magistrate looks at the charter, looks at me, and looks at the charter again with the expression of someone who has not seen this document type before and is trying to decide what authority it carries. The hearing takes 2 sessions. The copyist's advocate argues that ideas cannot be owned. I bring Hoffman to testify, who explains that the charter records not an idea but a specific documented implementation with dated evidence of prior creation. The magistrate deliberates for 4 days. The ruling: the copyist pays a fine equal to the profit from his 7 sales to date and ceases production of the infringing design. The ruling is limited and imperfect. It does not establish a broad legal precedent. It does not stop future copiers in other jurisdictions, and the fine is small. But it is a ruling. It is on record. The Charter of Invention is now a document that a city court has treated as legally meaningful. Within a month, Hoffman tells me, he has received 5 other requests from craftsmen and merchants wanting charters of invention for their own work. A tool maker who has spent 10 years developing a specific lathe mechanism, a die merchant who developed a proprietary fixing process, a baker who invented a particular oven configuration. I did not plan to create a legal instrument. I planned to protect my own work. The instrument turned out to be useful to other people as well. That is fine. That is, in fact, exactly how it should work. The collegiate installation comes through in the 2nd year of production. The rector, not the professor, the rector, the administrative head of the institution, sends a purchasing inquiry through normal channels. He wants 12 lamps for the main hall and the library reading room. The price is quoted, accepted, and the installation scheduled. I do it myself, with Marco and 2 workshop hands. It takes 2 days. On the 2nd afternoon, while we are running the final wire connections in the main hall, I look up from the junction box I'm working on and see the professor of natural philosophy standing under one of the new lamp housings, with a book in his hands. He is reading. The hall is dim at this hour, late afternoon, cloudy day, the windows not giving much. He has moved to stand directly under the lamp housing, in the circle of white light it throws, because it is the brightest spot in the room. He is reading with the focused ease of someone who has found good light and is using it without thinking about where it comes from. He does not look at me. He does not look up from the book. I finish the junction connection. I check the torque on the terminal screws. I move to the next junction. I do not say anything to him. There is nothing to say. The light is there, he is using it, and the argument we had 2 years ago in this building has been settled by the installation, not by the argument. That is enough. The wind sail business is profitable and growing, and it is not enough. I have been running the numbers for 6 months, and the conclusion is always the same. Wind sail installations serve individual buildings. Each installation is custom, each requires on-site work, each generates revenue once at sale, and then a small monthly maintenance fee. The ceiling on this model is the number of wealthy buildings in the city, and I'm approaching that ceiling faster than I expected. I have installed in 43 locations. There are perhaps 30 more realistic prospects in the city before I have saturated the market of people who can afford the current price. Street lighting is the next scale of problem. The city has 400 oil lamps on its main streets. Replacing even a portion of them with current lamps would be a contract larger than everything I have sold so far combined. But street lighting requires a centralized source. You cannot put individual wind sails on every lamp post. You need one large source that distributes current through a network to every lamp simultaneously. The wind cannot be that source. Wind is variable. A calm night and every street goes dark. That is not a city lighting contract, that is a liability. I spend 3 evenings walking the river that runs through the south edge of the city. It is a working river. 2 mills already operate on it, plus a fulling operation and a tannery upstream. The current is strong through the city reach, strongest at the point where the river narrows between the old stone bridge abutments. Water moves faster than wind in this section of the river. More importantly, it moves constantly. The same current, day and night, summer and winter, regardless of weather. The mills on this river run every day of the year except during hard winter freeze, which happens 3 or 4 times in a generation. If a water wheel can turn a millstone, it can turn a generator. A generator driven by a water wheel runs continuously. Continuous generation into a large cell bank means a buffer against any short interruption. The current flows to the street lamps through buried wire. Every lamp on the network lights when the wheel turns. This is the design. The question is whether I can build it. The physical challenge is scale. Hugo's mill uses a water wheel about 4 meters in diameter driving a moderate grinding load. My generator needs a wheel at least twice that size to produce useful current at city lighting scale, and the generator itself needs to be proportionally larger than anything I have built. A disc several meters across mounted horizontally, driven by a vertical shaft from the wheel. The cell bank needs to be large enough to buffer the entire street network through a wheel stoppage of several hours. I have never built anything at this scale. I know the principles scale linearly, twice the wheel diameter, roughly twice the output, but the structural engineering is different at large scale. Forces I can ignore in a rooftop installation become significant when the structure weighs several tons and must resist river current continuously. I need money, engineering expertise I do not yet have, and city permission to build a dam structure on the river. Haas's investment capital covers the materials for a standard installation. It does not cover a civil engineering project. I need the city to be a partner, not just a customer. I request a meeting with the city council. The first session is 3 months after I submit the written proposal. The proposal is detailed, 12 pages of specifications, cost projections, installation timeline, maintenance plan, and a calculation showing the city's current annual oil lamp expenditure against the proposed fixed monthly payment for current supply. The numbers favor the current system starting in year 2, after the installation cost is amortized. There are 9 councilors and the city head, Brenner, who chairs the session. I recognize Brenner immediately. He does not visibly recognize me or chooses not to. Either is possible. He is a politician. The session runs 2 hours. The questions from the councilors fall into 3 categories which I anticipated and prepared answers for. The first category is technical. What happens when it breaks? Who fixes it? How long does repair take? I explain the maintenance structure, the cell bank buffer capacity that keeps the network running for several hours through a wheel stoppage, and the training program I will establish for city-employed maintenance workers. The second category is financial. What if the cost projections are wrong? What if materials prices rise? What if the contractor defaults? I offer a penalty clause for extended outages, a price lock provision for the first 3 years, and a performance bond against default. The third category is fear dressed as practicality. What if no one else knows how to run this if something happens to me? What if the current injures someone? What if God considers this an offense? The third category takes the most time because it is not really about the questions being asked. It is about people who distrust novelty and are looking for language to express that distrust. I answer all of it. Brenner says almost nothing in the first session. He asks 2 technical questions in the second session, both sharp and well-informed. He has read the proposal and understood it, which is more than some of the councilors managed. In the third session, he summarizes the objections, responds to each with the answers I have given, and calls for a vote. The vote is 6-3 in favor of proceeding to contract negotiation. I sit across from the city solicitor for 4 more weeks working through the contract language. He is a thorough man, and he is representing the city's interests carefully, which I respect. We disagree on 2 things. The first disagreement is the maintenance penalty clause. He wants a penalty that triggers after any outage longer than 4 hours. I want the trigger at 12 hours, because 4 hours is within the cell bank buffer and does not represent a system failure. We settle on 8 hours, which is defensible on both sides. The second disagreement is the exclusivity clause. The solicitor includes, buried in paragraph 14, a provision stating that I will be the sole supplier of current-based street lighting to the city for the duration of the contract and that the city will not enter similar arrangements with any other provider. I read this 3 times before I respond. On the surface, it sounds favorable to me. Exclusive supply means no competition for this contract, but the clause does not protect me. It captures me. If the city is the only buyer I am permitted to sell street lighting to, and the contract comes up for renewal in 5 years, the city can offer me any renewal terms it chooses because I have no alternative buyer. The exclusivity removes competition, but it removes my competition as much as it removes anyone else's. I cross out paragraph 14 and return the draft. The solicitor sends it back with paragraph 14 restored and a covering note explaining that the city requires supply security. I write back, the city's supply security is guaranteed by the penalty clauses and the performance bond. Exclusivity is not supply security. It is price control, and it benefits the city at my expense. In the renewal negotiation, I will not sign a contract with an exclusivity provision. 2 more weeks of back and forth. The councilors are annoyed. Brenner sends a personal note suggesting that without exclusivity, the council may reconsider the contract entirely. I write back to Brenner directly, not through the solicitor. I point out that the city has been paying increasing oil costs for a decade and will continue to do so without this contract. I point out that I have 3 other cities within a day's travel who have expressed interest in a similar arrangement. I point out that if this city passes and another city takes the contract first, this city will spend the next several years watching its neighbor have lit streets while it continues to pay for oil. I do not threaten. I just describe the situation accurately. Brenner removes the exclusivity clause. The councilors sign. Brenner signs last with the expression of a man who has made a good decision and is not entirely happy about how he got there. He does not mention the meeting 5 years ago when he told me to go home. I do not mention it either. I sign the contract and shake his hand and leave. Construction takes 8 months. The dam is the first serious problem. I calculate the required structure based on the force equations from my mechanics books, build it, and watch it partially collapse. During the spring flood when the water pressure at peak flow exceeds my calculations by about 30%. The calculation error was mine. I used average flow data instead of peak flow data for the structural loading. We rebuild it thicker. This costs 6 weeks and a significant portion of the contingency budget. Haas sends a note asking for an update. I send back a note describing the problem, the cause, and the fix. He replies with one line, "Fix it correctly." The wire shock incident happens during the cable laying. A laborer touches an uninsulated junction while the test current is running and takes a full discharge through his hand and arm. He falls, is not seriously hurt, but is badly frightened, and by the following morning none of the 12 laborers on the cable crew want to continue the work. I spend that evening developing wire insulation for the long outdoor runs, strips of heavy linen soaked in pine tar and wound tightly around the copper, then coated with a second layer of rendered tallow that hardens as it cools. It is not elegant, but it is effective. I demonstrate the insulation by touching the wrapped wire while current runs through it. Nothing happens. I do this in front of all 12 laborers the next morning. 10 of them come back to work. 2 do not. I hire replacements. 8 months after breaking ground, on a clear October evening, I stand at the main connection point and close the primary circuit. The water wheel is turning at the speed I calculated. The generator is running. The cell bank is fully charged from 6 hours of pre-operation. 20 lamp posts on the central market square and the 4 streets running off it light up simultaneously. Not sequentially, not one by one, all at once, the same moment, white light flooding the square from 20 points at the same time. It is a different thing from watching a single lamp come on in a room. The scale of it changes what it is. People come out of their houses, shopkeepers come to their doorways. A group of children run into the square and stand in the middle of it looking up at the lamp posts, and then at each other. An old woman on the corner opposite me touches one of the lamp posts with one hand, as if verifying that it is real. Marco is standing next to me. He says nothing for a long time. Then, "You should write down what tonight costs." I already know. 8 months of construction, partial dam collapse and rebuild, 6 worker incidents minor and 1 major, 40% over initial budget. 2 investors calling for updates every week for the last 2 months. I look at the square, worth every item on that list. The 3 neighboring cities send delegations within 4 months of the first square lighting. Word travels fast between merchant communities. Every merchant in every city within a day's travel has a contact in this city who wrote them a letter about the night the square lit up. By the time the first formal inquiry arrives, I have already drafted a standard city contract template that covers the main negotiation points and leaves only pricing and timeline as variables. This saves 3 weeks of back and forth per city. The first city signs in 2 months. A river town to the east, smaller than mine, with a similar river current, and a council that is younger and faster moving than Brenner's. They want the same 20-street installation as the first city. We agree on terms in 4 sessions. The second city takes longer, 5 months, 6 sessions, but signs. They want a larger installation, 40 streets, and negotiate harder on price. I hold the price but offer a longer payment schedule. They accept. The third city does not sign. The bishop of that diocese has issued a formal pastoral letter. It arrives in my office through indirect channels, a copy made by a clerk, and passed through 3 hands before reaching me. And it is specific and clear. The current lamp system, it states, is an instrument of disruption of the natural order. God divided light from darkness at the foundation of creation. Man's replacement of night with artificial light is an act of presumption against divine arrangement. The faithful are counseled not to purchase or install such devices, and city officials who enter contracts for such systems do so against the guidance of Holy Church. I read the letter twice. The bishop is not unintelligent. He has identified the correct threat to his authority, not doctrinal, but social. Night has always belonged to the Church. Vespers, compline, the canonical hours of darkness that structure monastic life and give parish priests their moment of maximum influence when people are at home and uncertain. A lit city at night is a city where people have other options at night, and other options at night are a problem for institutions that depend on there being nothing else to do. I do not respond to the bishop publicly. A public argument with a bishop is a fight I cannot win regardless of the merits, because the bishop is not arguing on merits. He is arguing on authority, and authority is not answerable to logic. Instead, I find Father Gregor. He is a parish priest in my city, younger than most, known for his scholarship, and for the fact that he runs an evening reading class for craftsmen's children in his church hall. He has been using one of my lamps in the church hall since the monastery installation. The abbot mentioned his hall to me, and I donated a unit at reduced cost as a gesture to the community. I visit Father Gregor on a Sunday afternoon and ask him a simple question. Would he be willing to say publicly, in his own words and without any arrangement between us, what he thinks about the use of current light for reading scripture and conducting education? He thinks for a moment. Then he says that he has thought about this already, and that in his view a lamp that helps the poor read the Word of God is doing God's work regardless of its power source. He says he will preach this on the following Sunday if I think it would be useful. I tell him I think it would be useful. His sermon is quoted in 3 cities within 2 weeks. The bishop does not retract his letter, but the clear split within the clergy gives city councils the cover they need to make commercial decisions without appearing to defy the church wholesale. The third city remains closed for now, the others are not. The factory opens on the north side of the city, in a building large enough to employ 40 workers across 3 shifts. Marco runs production. I run the design and specification side and manage the city contracts. We divide the work cleanly because we understand each other's strengths and because Marco, over 5 years of partnership, has developed a quality standard that matches mine without requiring my constant supervision. The factory produces generator assemblies, cell bank units, lamp housings with the spring advance mechanism, wire spools cut to standard lengths, switch assemblies, and the full suite of mounting hardware. Each component is built to a master specification with check dimensions. Finished assemblies go through a test bench before they leave the building. Within a year, the factory is running at capacity. I plan an expansion. The new inventions come from problems the installations reveal. The pump comes from a conversation with the city's fire brigade chief, who asks at a council meeting whether my current system could power a water pump. His pumps are human-operated and slow. In a major fire, the water delivery cannot keep up with the fire spread. I think about it for a week, and then build a prototype. A current-driven crank mechanism connected to a double-acting piston pump, drawing from a cistern, and delivering a consistent stream at useful pressure. The fire chief tests it. It pumps 3 times the volume per minute of his best hand crew. 3 cities buy fire pumps within 6 months. 2 more buy them for garden fountains, which is a less essential application but considerably easier to install and maintain. The signal device comes from my own frustration at the factory. When I need Marco at the other end of the building, I have to either walk there or send a runner. I build a simple mechanism, a thin metal tongue mounted at the end of a long wire, connected to the circuit through a small switch at my desk. When I press the switch, current runs through the tongue and makes it vibrate against a metal plate, producing a buzzing sound audible across a noisy workshop. Marco hears it and comes. Within a month, 3 wealthy households in the city have asked me to install versions of this in their homes as servant call systems. I had not planned to sell it. I make a standard product from it in 2 weeks and add it to the catalog. The Lamplighters Guild response is predictable, and I had planned for it. They begin with a petition to the city council arguing that my street lighting system has destroyed their livelihood. This is accurate. The petition requests that the city cancel the current lighting contract and restore the oil lamp system. This the council will not do because the current system costs less, and the councilors know it. When the petition fails, they move to sabotage. 2 nights in the same week, lamp posts on the South Market Street are found broken in the morning. The glass housings smashed, the rod holders bent. The damage is not extensive, but it is clear and intentional. I bring this to the council as a contract enforcement matter. The council investigates and finds 2 former lamplighters responsible. They are fined. On the 3rd day after the fines are announced, I go to the Lamplighters Guild Hall and meet with the chairman. Not the same man who threw me out years ago, he retired, but his successor, a practical man named Wolf, who understands that his industry is finished and is trying to manage the transition. I offer Wolf's members a training program. My systems require regular maintenance, rod replacement, cell inspection, wire checks, lamp housing cleaning. This is skilled work. It needs to be done on a regular schedule, and I currently do it with my own workshop staff who are at capacity. If the lamplighters train to do maintenance work, I will contract them to service the city network. Same weekly income, different task. About half the guild takes the offer. The other half finds other work or retires. The sabotage stops. The letter from the village of Breck arrives on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. It is written in a clerk's hand, formal, slightly stiff, which tells me someone wrote it for the person sending it, who cannot write. The message is brief. Klaus, formerly of Breck Village, is ill and has few resources. He asks whether his son Adrian, who he understands has done well for himself, might see fit to send some assistance. I read it at my desk. I set it down. I pick it up and read it again. My father is 60-something years old, which, in a village like Breck, means he is genuinely old. The man who used to hit me for keeping paper money to buy books. The man who told me my only options were submission or the street. I think about this for a while. Marco comes in with a production question, sees my expression, and asks what has happened. I show him the letter. He reads it. He waits. I take out a sheet of paper, write a number on it, not a letter, just a number, the amount I'm sending, and fold it around enough coin to cover it and hand it to my runner with the address. Marco watches me do this. After the runner leaves, he says, "Because I am not going to become someone who lets an old man starve to prove a point to himself." He thinks about this. That is not what I would have done. I know, I say. You would have written a letter too. I go back to work. The patent problem develops slowly and then all at once. In my own city, the charter of invention has legal weight. In the 2 eastern cities I now operate in, I register equivalent documents with local notaries who follow the same format Hoffman established. But outside these 3 cities, in the towns and smaller settlements across the province, there is no enforcement. 3 workshops I know of are producing components that are clearly derived from my designs, selling them at reduced prices to buyers who either do not know or do not care about the origin. My charters cannot reach them. There is no mechanism. I spend 3 months planning the approach, then travel to the provincial capital with a proposal for the royal administrator. His name is Councillor Veth. He is a career administrator, middle-aged, competent in the specific way of men who manage large bureaucracies, good at process, cautious about risk, Interested in revenue. My proposal takes 15 minutes to explain. The Crown receives 5% of all my city contract revenue in exchange for issuing a royal charter of protection, a document carrying the Crown's authority that makes my invention rights enforceable throughout the province. Any workshop copying my designs without license becomes liable to the Crown's courts, not just local notaries. Veth listens. He asks 3 questions. How large is the current revenue base? What is the projected growth? And whether the 5% applies to future contracts as well as current ones? I answer all 3. The numbers are significant. He can see that 5% of a growing provincial infrastructure contract portfolio is not a trivial amount, and it costs the Crown nothing except the issuance of a document and the implicit backing of its courts. He tells me he will consider it. 1 week later, his clerk delivers a letter. The Crown will issue the charter on the terms proposed. I return from the capital with a document sealed with the provincial royal seal that reads, in formal Latin, that Hoffman helped me draft before I left, as a royal charter of invention protecting the described current generation and current storage systems throughout the province against unauthorized reproduction. It is the first document of its kind issued by this Crown. Hoffman, when I show it to him, reads it carefully and says, "You're going to need a lawyer eventually." "I know," I say. "Do you know a good one?" He gives me a name. I write it down. Baron Streich has been quiet until now. His name appears in background conversations. A councillor in the second city mentions that a representative of Streich's household attended one of the early council sessions and asked pointed questions about the contract terms. A merchant I know in the first city mentions that Streich has been asking about the cell bank supply chain. He has not moved directly yet. He is watching. He is a man who has governed his territory for 20 years, and he moves carefully when something is new. I watch him back. I have 3 city contracts, a factory at capacity, a royal patent, and a growing list of product types. I have Marco, who I trust completely, and Haas, who I trust commercially. I have a lawyer's name on a piece of paper. What I do not have is any answer to a man with a title, inherited land, and the kind of authority that does not need to argue in court. He is going to move. I do not know when, and I do not know how. But a man who governs the land surrounding 3 of my operating cities, and who understands that cheap energy reduces his leverage over those cities. That man does not stay quiet forever. I make a note to think about this more systematically. I write at the top of the page, what does Streich actually want, and what can I offer him that is worth more to him than blocking me? I do not have an answer yet, but having the right question is always the first step. Let me tell you what I have built. 3 cities on contract. River installations running continuously, 20 streets lit in each, fire pumps operational, signal systems in 100 wealthy homes across all 3. 1 factory on Tanner Street, 40 workers, 3 shifts, 5 charters of invention registered locally, and 1 royal patent covering the entire province. Marco owns 10% of the enterprise, which he earned and which I gave him without negotiation, because it was the right number, and he knew it was the right number, and neither of us needed to discuss it at length. Haas still holds his 25%, passive now, collecting his share without contributing much beyond the initial capital that made the first production run possible. The second investor, Renz, holds his 10% with an expression of quiet satisfaction every time we pass each other on the market street. The lawyer Hoffman recommended. A sharp woman named Ida, who has been practicing civil and commercial law for 15 years, handles the contract disputes and patent enforcement. She costs more than I would like and is worth more than she costs. This is what I have. I know the number on each item because knowing the numbers is how I have always moved through the world, from the 12 copper coins in my pocket when I arrived in this city to the current monthly revenue, which is large enough that I no longer count in copper. None of it is safe. I learn about the filing on a Thursday evening from Marco, who heard it from a wine merchant in the tavern near the factory, who heard it from a city clerk who was told not to repeat it. A petition has been submitted to the royal court. Baron Streich's seal is on it, along with 2 others, the bishop of the northern diocese and a merchant guild chairman from the capital whose name I recognize as a man who has been trying to enter the urban lighting market for 2 years without success. The petition requests 3 things from the royal court in the capital. First, the annulment of all charters of invention and the royal patent on the grounds that the provincial administrator who issued the royal patent exceeded his authority. There is no law that grants a provincial administrator the power to create a new category of intellectual property, and therefore the document he issued is legally void. Second, the transfer of all existing city lighting contracts from private management to Crown administration, on the grounds that the supply of essential civic infrastructure to multiple cities by a single private individual constitutes a concentration of power that represents a threat to civic order and royal sovereignty. Third, the placement of Adrian of Breck. That is what the document calls me. The village I left at 14 under royal supervision pending investigation of whether his activities and their social effects warrant further regulatory action. Royal supervision, that is the polite term for it. I verify all of this through Ida, who has a contact in the capital who confirms the filing the following morning. The first session of the royal court hearing is in 7 days. I sit with this information for 1 hour. 1 hour is what I allow myself before I have to start moving. The case against me has 3 legs. The patent annulment argument has some legal merit. Veth may have exceeded his technical authority, though the Crown has benefited from the 5% arrangement and will not want to admit the document is void. The contract transfer argument is political theater with legal language wrapped around it. Streech wants the contracts because controlling city energy supply means controlling the cities, which means controlling their councils, which means restoring the leverage he lost when they stopped needing his roads and his grain supply so urgently. The supervision request is the most dangerous because it is the most vague. Pending investigation can mean anything and last any length of time. Streich is not stupid. He assembled the right coalition. The bishop provides the moral argument. Light at night disrupts the divine order and gives the petition a religious legitimacy that cannot be easily dismissed. The guild chairman provides the economic argument. Monopoly power in civic infrastructure is dangerous, which gives the petition a commercial legitimacy that sounds reasonable to people who do not know that the guild chairman has been trying to enter this market on his own terms and failed. The royal councillor provides the political argument and the access to the court that makes the petition possible at all. 3 legs, each one from a different direction. Together they create a case that is not easily argued against on a single axis because they are not making a single argument. If I spend 7 days preparing a legal defense, I will lose her. Ida is good, but 7 days against 3 established institutional actors in a court they know better than she does is not a winnable position. I do not need to win the legal argument. I need to make the legal argument irrelevant. I spend the first night writing letters. The mayors of all 3 cities receive letters explaining the filing and its implications. If the contracts transfer to Crown administration, the cities lose their current favorable pricing. The Crown will charge whatever it chooses because there will be no competition. The fire pumps become Crown property. The street maintenance schedule will be managed from a capital 3 days travel away by administrators who have never seen a graphite rod. I ask each mayor to consider whether this outcome serves their city's interests and whether they have the authority to submit a formal objection to the court. All 3 mayors reply within 2 days. All 3 file objections. The abbot of the monastery outside the city receives a letter explaining that the bishop's involvement in the petition is predicated on the argument that artificial light disrupts the divine order. The monastery has been using my light for 4 years in its reading rooms, its scriptorium, and its night chapel. I ask the abbot whether he agrees with his bishop's position and whether he would be willing to attest formally to the charitable uses of the system within his institution. The abbot replies with a 4-page letter that I forward directly to the court. Father Gregor, who preached about light in scripture 2 years ago, agrees to submit a written statement without being asked twice. 3 other parish priests in my city, who have been using donated lamp units in their community halls, do the same. The guild chairman from the capital is the economic leg of the petition. I pull every record I have of his attempts to enter the lighting market. Failed bids on 2 city contracts. A copyist workshop he backed that collapsed after my patent enforcement actions. 2 letters from his agents asking to license my designs, which I declined. I give this package to Ida with instructions to present it to the court as evidence that the petition's economic argument originates with a direct commercial competitor, not with a disinterested concern for public welfare. The provincial administrator Veth, who issued the royal patent, is in a difficult position. If the court rules the patent void, it reflects on his judgment and his authority. I write to him not to ask for help, but to inform him of a legal argument Ida will be making, that the royal patent is valid under a reasonable interpretation of provincial administrative powers, that the Crown has accepted and banked 5% of my revenue under its terms for 2 years without objection, and that voiding the patent now would require the Crown to either refund those payments or acknowledge that it collected revenue under an arrangement it simultaneously claims is invalid. I suggest he may wish to have his own legal counsel present this view to the court independently. Veth replies that he will be represented at the hearing. On the 3rd day, Marco comes to the workshop late in the evening. I'm at my desk with papers spread across every surface. The letters, the draft, legal arguments Ida has sent for my review, the financial records I'm preparing as evidence of the tax revenue the 3 cities generate under current arrangements. The lamp on the desk is burning, the same design I have been selling for 8 years. The spring advance moving the graphite rods forward by fractions of a millimeter as they burn. I built this one myself, years ago before the factory existed. Marco sits down across from me without explaining why he has come at this hour, which means what he has to say is difficult to start. I wait. He says, I was approached today. They came to the factory. A man I did not recognize, well-dressed, said he represented a party interested in the court case. He said, if I testify at the hearing that the designs were developed collaboratively, that my contributions to the metalwork represent co-invention, that the charters should properly name me as co-inventor, he said I would receive 50 gold and full forgiveness of the loan I took last year to buy into the expanded factory. He puts his hands flat on the table. He looks at them. He said I had 4 days to decide. I look at him. 50 gold is a significant amount of money. The factory loan is a real liability that Marco has been servicing carefully, but which he feels the offer is precisely calibrated to what Marco would find difficult to refuse. Not so large that it seems unreal, exactly large enough to solve 2 actual problems in his life. Streich's people are thorough. What did you tell him? I say. I told him I needed to think about it. He looks up. That is why I'm here. I look at him for a long moment. I think about the market stall where I found him underpricing his wire and told him the real value instead of buying it cheap. I think about the first time he held charcoal tips and the arc jumped between them and he dropped them and crossed himself and then picked them up again. Do you remember the first time I showed you the arc? I say. You dropped the holders. I remember. You could have walked away that day, decided it was too strange or too dangerous or too much trouble. You did not. He is quiet. Outside the window, the street lamp on the corner is burning. It has been burning every night for 3 years. 42 other lamps in this city are burning right now. In 2 other cities, 40 more each. All running from water that has always run and always will run. I stand up and take a fresh sheet of paper. Go home, I say. Sleep. Do not answer him either way before you talk to me again. He nods. He stands at the door. He pauses. What are you going to do? He says. Write more letters, I say. I have 7 days and I do not have an army, so I need to build one that does not require soldiers. He leaves. I write. The merchants who supply my factory. The craftsmen who have trained under my maintenance program and now earn their living from it. The 40 workers on 3 shifts who have families and rent and no interest in seeing the factory transferred to Crown management. The city councils who have seen their street budgets decrease every year since the contracts began. The lawyer Ida, the notary Hoffman, the abbot, the 3 priests. The provincial administrator who issued a patent he now needs to defend. Streech has a baron's title and 3 institutional allies and a court filing. I have everyone whose life is materially better because the lights are on. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the only kind of army that wins without fighting. I write until the graphite rods need replacing. I replace them without stopping. I keep writing. 7 days.